Present. Here.
Trustee Khan,
Here.
trustee Andrews here, trustee Clark,
Here.
and trustee Patel.
Here.
Thank you. So before we get started, is there any changes or reordering you'd like to do with the agenda items?
I do.
Okay,
I think it's good.
I'm sorry, you're okay?
No problem.
All right, if that's the case then.
Terry, I'm sorry, I do. There are a couple things on the consent calendar. Is this the right place? That I'd like to move to item 4, just because I have some questions that it never seems like I have time to ask.
Okay, sure.
And now we seem to have a little more time, so if I may ask for 3B and C to be moved into 4, I appreciate that.
Okay, anything else?
Just B and C.
Yeah.
So with that change, moving 3B and C to item 4, do we have a motion to approve the adoption of the agenda?
So moved. Second.
All in favor, please say aye, raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye. All right, that motion carries. The next we have public comment on non-agenda items. 2D. Yeah, and I'm sorry, Mr. Amy, did I get ahead of your request here to talk in advance at 2C?
Somewhat.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Andrews. Pardon me, I have a cold. I just wanted to comment and applaud, I suppose, the library district and the board. And in case anyone isn't aware, this is potentially the first time since January 1st, 2017 that this board will meet without violating the Brown Act. You all have chosen to spend a great deal of money related to Brown Act violations, and one of the newer elements of the Brown Act requires that your agenda have on it information for individuals who might need assistance to attend the meeting per ADA requirements. For whatever reason, that has not been the case until tonight's meeting. That despite hundreds of thousands of dollars of taxpayer money intended to be used to the benefit of library constituents being spent on outside counsel, specifically Best and Krieger, who has apparently signed off on earlier agendas and advised extensively, etc., per Brown Act requirements. I applaud staff for avoiding legal action on this by complying with the law, but for those of you who have publicly commented about what great legal advice you've received from Best and Krieger, you all might want to reconsider that position and ask why this rather glaring error has occurred for so long. So thank you, and again, kudos to staff for responding appropriately.
Okay, thank you. All right, the next item is the...
Public comment?
Oh, I'm sorry, Mark, I didn't see you.
No, I know. What memory did I get? I didn't get out. I've been doing too much work at home. But welcome, happy day after Easter and Resurrection and all of those in Christian faith. It was a great day, except for the sadness that happened in Sri Lanka and stuff. So those kind of things happen. But back home, last Saturday, I think, Renee, the sheriff search and rescue team went out and had 3 different calls at one time. Was it Saturday? What day was it? Saturday. And so I'll just, speaking from a Rotarian's point of view right now, we're actually doing a breakfast on May 11th. Have tickets for sale in my pocket somewhere, or there somewhere. $5, May 11th from 8 to 10:30. So I encourage anybody here in the audience or anybody who's going to listen to this over the next 2 weeks to consider coming out and support the LA Sheriff's Deputy Rescue, or the Deputy Sheriff program that does the search and rescue. And then the other thing is, real quick, if you haven't seen the signs around town, the Altadena Town Council is looking for members, so I would encourage that. So I'm taking public comment time to just share those kind of things to make sure. Those here are probably pretty active, but if anybody listens to this broadcast, hopefully, they'll do one of those two things. And then I'll talk into the other stuff. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Okay, moving on to item 3, the consent calendar. 2 of those items have been taken off to talk under item 4, but we've got the approval of the minutes, so if I could get a motion to approve the minutes from the last meeting.
So moved. I'll second them.
It's been moved and seconded then to approve the minutes from the March 25th meeting. All in favor, please say aye and raise your hand.
Aye.
All right, that motion carries. Now we're to item 4, in which we will discuss statistical reports and department monthly reports. In that order, Bessie? Would you like to-
Yeah,
okay.
that would work great. First of all, I just feel like so many meetings have gone by in which we by necessity have had to breeze through this stuff, and I know when I was in the chair, always wanting to assure the staff that we really do read it and we really do appreciate it. So I want to say that once again from the top, and just that it's such a stunning documentation of all of the work that goes on every month. Every month when I read it, things tweak my curiosity, and I have questions, and I've thought, I just shouldn't take up meeting time with that. But then this time I thought, you know what, I will once at least, in case other people have some of the same questions I do about just how the place runs. So that's kind of what I'm about. And the first question I have is on page 7. How do you count how many visits? I know how I do it in my library. I have an electric eye that counts people that come through the door, but I don't know how it's done here.
Yeah, sorry. Yes, both of our sites have door counters, and so when people walk through the door, it clicks, and at the end of the month, we have a tally.
You add it up and divide it by 2,
Yes,
like I do,
exactly.
right? Because people come and go. You can't count them twice. Okay. That makes sense. Okay, I've just never noticed it. That's why I was wondering. On page 11, I had a question about the purchase suggestions, which is phenomenal. I use it myself. I love that feature of the services of the library. That if you didn't know this, if there's anything you want to buy that we don't have, you can ask for it, and usually they buy it. But I wondered, once you get those requests, what the decision process is after that. I mean, do you buy everything people ask for? Do you?
I wanted to know that. That's my other question.
I'll go ahead and take that question. So there is definitely a review process. Carlene, who's sitting right here, handles most of the reviews for purchase suggestions. Generally, the philosophy we try to say is that I try to encourage us to just accept as many purchase suggestions as we can, which kind of goes a little arrears in terms of collection development philosophy, because with collection development philosophy, you want to take in consideration with nonfiction materials age, currency, and all kinds of criteria. But by the same token, I feel that if a member of my community is saying, please, can you get this item for me, who am I to say no? So we generally do try to accept as many purchase suggestions as possible. Sometimes we may refer something to interlibrary loan at no cost, because occasionally we do get some really random out there requests that we're just not going to keep on the shelf, or for example textbooks. So there are some things that we might not take in as a purchase suggestion but then turn it into an interlibrary loan. Sometimes we might have to slow down a little bit as we get more towards the end of the fiscal year in terms of what we're able to accept, just because we're getting towards the end of the fiscal year.
Could you just briefly just say how interlibrary loan works here?
Yes. So we are a member of many libraries internationally that support interlibrary loans. So what the process is if a patron has something that they would like to read, or it's a DVD or a music CD, we can borrow it from another library for a $1 fee to the patron. Now, we can't borrow items internationally. We also don't lend items to international libraries. Part of that is just the way that our postage works here. It kind of prevents us from being able to do that. But basically, there is a software system that you tap into, and then you can look at a host of libraries around the world and to see who has an item. And then generally, you request it from 10 libraries, and then it's just the first library to respond will be the one that sends the item. Also, we're also, so that's borrowing. We're also a lender library, so by the same token, libraries will reach out to us, and within the software, we can see if we have the item, if we're able to lend it out. Generally, we won't lend out brand new items. We like to make sure that if they just come in, that we have them here for our patrons, but older items, you know, even if it's like 5 months out, then we'll go ahead and lend something out. And again, we lend out books, music, DVDs, and I feel like there's something else. So in terms of right now, it's our technical services department that is handling the interlibrary loans, but we are going to be moving that back up to circulation department. So.
Can you give me an idea of, like, roughly in a month, what would be a normal number of ILL requests that you get? I'm just curious.
Ooh, I'm just forgetting that amount.
Well, is it more like 5 or is it like 20 or
no,
is it like?
sometimes it can be like 20. We're definitely, one thing is we definitely loan more items than we borrow. So, you
That's
know,
good.
ideally, in a way, we'd like to do the other way around,
Yeah.
but
Yeah, interesting. Thank you. By the way, I have a few more questions, and I just want to say, I meant to say this at the top. I don't want to put anybody on the spot, and if whoever would know the answer to the question is not here, that's perfectly fine. I'm just curious. So, back on, for another collection development question, I noticed in Carlene's report talking about selectors, about how, I guess, different people on the staff select for different parts of the collection, I guess. I just wondered how that works. How are the selectors organized? Maybe.
Don't go for it.
Mm.
Sorry.
not trying to steal the show.
Oh, no. You just have all the answers.
So with children's materials, it's the children's librarian who selects those materials. Amanda, who also works in the department, does also select some of the Spanish language materials, and then Christina reviews those selections. Teen librarian purchases teen materials. Then within the collection development department, Carlene selects fiction and some of our audiovisual materials. We have a staff person, Mark, who selects graphic novels and science fiction, who he works within technical services as well. And then I do some selecting as well. And then Diana, our branch librarian, selects materials for all age groups for the Bob Lucas location.
And who selects nonfiction?
Oh, that's me.
That's you. Okay, thank you. Two more, I think. I was just looking at the Bob Lucas report, and I was just, and maybe Diana, I don't think is here, so maybe she won't be able to, but the questions that I have about that were, in the attempt to try to provide practice test taking for college entrance exams, I wondered how that was promoted. It's too bad that there was low turnout, you know, because I do think there could be a demand for it. So I just wondered how kids would have learned about it. Does anybody know?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes through all our PR opportunities, whether it's social media or flyers at the library. I mean, I think the staff at Bob Lucas does a really good job of spreading the word with all the patrons that come in on whatever program it is. You know, sometimes it's just timing in terms of how many kids
Yeah.
we get.
I just
But
wondered
when
if they
you-
might have had contact, like, with, I mean, the people who would know kids who would need that are the counselors at Muir, for example.
Or
Well,
PHS.
we'll pass that along.
Yeah.
I'm sure they reach out to the
Yeah,
schools
I would
as
think
well.
so. Okay.
Can I jump in here?
Sure.
Betsy?
I wanna
My
jump
observation
in.
on that very same thing was that the schools themselves are doing such a good job of setting up programs for that you kind of pass that off to being low demand of the library because the schools are jumping all over it right now. So that was my take on it.
Well, my question about that would be, what's the cost? Because they, I mean, they offer that in my district too, but you have to pay for it, you know? So the opportunity for, and I don't know if this was free, but if it was free, that could have
It
made the
sounded
difference.
like it was free.
Yeah.
The other thing that I wanted to know, was this on a Saturday that this was offered? I had the same question because it is a valuable a part of education, especially for our youth, to make sure that they know about all of these areas that could help them with their scores. But when was it offered? Was it offered on a Saturday?
Yeah, I'm not sure of this.
You're not sure? Oh, okay.
But we do offer it at Maine too. I was just asking Stella, so what's the turnout at Maine? And as she said, it's hit and miss, and, you know,
Oh,
it's
yeah.
probably timing. But, you know, we'll take your suggestions to heart and do some more outreach.
Yeah.
Real good, real good.
Okay, and I'm, again, another sort of outreach question. There was a mention of how much demand there is for the Spanish language collection at Lucas, but how it's kind of a relatively small percentage of the overall collection. She's talking about needing to weed in order to allow more space and resources for that. I'm just wondering how that's promoted. I mean, is it pretty much people who find themselves in the library, or are there Spanish-speaking organizations in town that receive outreach for Spanish services, Spanish language services?
I mean, I would think it would be the same, I'm sure it's the same methods of outreach, and then the staff does go to a lot of events in Altoona.
In town.
So I would suspect that they promote things like that
Yeah.
as well. I do know that Diana is really interested in building on that collection because there is a need. I think we have a need here too, that we should be building on. And not only Spanish, but some other languages that would be pertinent to our community. So
Great.
we're working on it.
Yeah, oh, for sure, I know. And then, this is my last question, and I guess Cindy, this would be for you. I was really interested in the draft of the evaluation form that was in here, and I just wondered, it was so thorough and just so detailed and well laid out. I wondered where it came from. Was there a template or a exemplar document that you used?
Well, we actually had a form. It was a short form prior to me arriving, and there was a committee, a staff committee, that looked at that and considered revisions. So we took a little bit of what they had used and applied it to my past experience in Glendale and the one that we had used in Glendale. So some of it is borrowed from Glendale, but we in Glendale had updated it 2 or 3 years ago, and it was really very successful in terms of, you know, from a supervisor's perspective and a staff perspective. So I thought it would be good here. And as I'll say, I won't have to say it, but what I was going to say is we really have to do a better job here of giving evaluations consistently. And I think because some people have not gotten evaluations for quite a while, to have this kind of detail will be really beneficial for people's professional
To
growth.
kind of catch up, yeah, because it's not just, you know, how have you been doing, but it gives you sort of benchmarks almost to aim for, so I was really, really impressed with that. Okay, that's all my
Well,
questions.
let me just
Yeah.
piggyback on all of that because she's covered some of the things that I wanted to talk about too. But I do say kudos to that, that evaluation because it looks very extensive and very thorough. So thank you so much for doing that. And I also want to talk about Bob Lucas. I noticed that it said that you had this program on Dinosaur Dig, and I thought that was quite cute when you talk about fossils and that kind of thing. So I really want to let them know that that's really very, very good. Thank you for the legal fees, some ideas about how we might cut cost on that. Wanted to also just sort of piggyback on your theme for the summer, because yesterday in the Star News, it featured a little blurb about a young kid over at PHS, Brooklyn Alford, a junior at PHS. Evidently, she's going to be displayed at the Hollywood Burbank Airport, and her work depicts the NASA mathematicians Katherine Johnson, Dorothy Vaughan, and Mary Jackson, heroes of the aviation. And it's going to be displayed at Burbank Airport, April 2020. But it might be a wonderful thing to invite this kid to come and sort of talk about her inspiration for that, and also to maybe even show it if she still has the part of that. So I just wanted to sort of piggyback on that.
Is that art?
That's the
Artwork about it?
artwork,
Uh-huh.
yes, her
And
artwork.
Actually, I have some involvement in that. The three cities, Pasadena, Burbank, Glendale.
Right.
All the three schools submit artwork, and
Yeah.
one artwork is chosen, I don't know if it's every year or every other year, to be displayed at the airport.
Right,
So, and I was involved with the Arts and Culture Commission in Glendale, and so it was always a fun thing to have the kids come in and
Yeah.
all the people that were finalists.
Well,
So I have a good connection to that, and yeah, I think that's a great idea.
thank you so much for that. And thank you for the art display here. And when I saw that, I just thought, okay, let me just look into that. Okay? Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
That's another one that I had here.
I've got just a comment or two. So thanks, Bessie, for carving out this subject.
Thank you.
I'm always afraid I'll get mired in all of the kudos for such good work on the reports that I see. The first thing is I'd like to thank you for, I think I mentioned a couple of meetings ago, it'd be nice to know who wrote them all, so that's helping me out a lot. But I noticed a couple things. One, in the report prepared by Diana Wan regarding the branch, and the way that she's moving the juvenile graphic novels in a more prominent place so that they can be seen and so on. I noticed that happens at Glendale Library. There's a big section for that right up in the front. And I think little things like that are what they make that users for life thing that we'd like to see with the young people. So that was great. And I got to thinking about how you've done that elsewhere in the library. I noticed the other day, right before the big Game of Thrones, reboot or TV, and I hate to say it, but I've never seen that show. But I did notice that author, I didn't even know there was a guy that wrote a book about it, to tell you the truth. I think his name was R.R. Martin.
George R.R.
All of his books are up there. And so that got me interested. So I didn't watch the show yet. I'm going to start with a book. But that whole idea of product placement, I think, you do a pretty good job with that, and that's going to be real important, especially going forward. And then one more shout out to Christina, who talked about in Children and Family Services about the attendance at that meeting in Wisconsin. And there was a paragraph toward the end of the first page that talked about the way that you sort of vet books that are going to talk about marginalized people and tricky issues and so on. And I never saw this. I know Stella does that a lot too, but I've never seen it put out in such detail, and it was really interesting to see that. So thanks a lot for your oversight of getting things like that done. And your chart, that looks terrific as well. So no questions, but a lot of comments. I think those reports look pretty good.
Well, we've been wondering whether the board, 'cause in my past life, our reports were not always read, And so we were sort of wondering, does the board read the
Yeah, we
report?
read
So
it.
it's really nice to hear this, so, kudos to our staff for putting these together every month, and I appreciate all your comments, and it's nice to know you're all reading it.
Okay, that's good, yeah, it would be bad.
That's good
Be terrible to do the
information.
work and not have it
Yeah.
read, so it's, I'm glad they're.
We've been reading them all along. I assure you that.
Very good.
It's been frustrating not to be able to spend any time on
Time on
them,
it,
so
yeah.
I'm glad I
Right
changed my
about it.
mind.
Thank you.
All right, with that, I would move that those two items get moved into the record. Okay, so I have a motion to move B and C, statistical reports and the monthly reports into the record.
So moved.
Okay,
Seconded.
okay, moved and seconded. Can we get a vote? All in favor, please say aye, raise your hand.
Aye.
All right, and the vote carries. Now we're to the reports section. He starts out with the Altadena Library Foundation. Someone like to?
Really nothing new to report this month.
Okay. No. And Friends of the Library.
Okay.
Mark Mariscal, president of the Friends of the Altadena Library. So our meeting next week, 2 weeks from today, Cindy and I have been talking, and I think it's really a nice thing that the staff and the director are putting together their wish list for the Friends to consider for their $24,000 to $30,000. Cindy, did you get that? In the range for money for next fiscal year, and I think that's nice. So we're going to be talking about it at our board meeting. Of course, the big thing, it's in the director's report. It's in the Connect this month, but it's really getting people prepared for the book sale next month, May 17th, 18th, and 19th. And the biggest thing for those, again, listening, and those here, if you're not a member, but you really truly love buying books, if you are a member, you get to come in on Friday at 3 o'clock. So you get this window of time ahead of time before it opens to the general public. Of course, the booksellers are all there too with their little scanners and all that. But it's a great time to look at some books before the general public. I will say, Terry, that I have never seen Games of Thrones either. But I do also echo, this library has done it, maybe you've noticed it a little bit more, but the staff has really, in the last few years, tried to put things, in the front of the library for the seasons, Easter or Halloween or all that. I think that's really nice, and I'm glad you recognize that. I think that's really good. Although I'll make quick comments on 5, B, and D, I will speak on behalf of the Friends that I think they're really happy to see that as far out in advance as you can for like your strategic planning meeting that's on Sunday, your special board meeting next week. I mean, I think they just like that. I've heard from 2 people so far about that, and so I think that was really good. So thank you for doing that. That's all we have.
Mark, does that fulfill your request then for those 2
For
items?
5A, but for 5B and C and D, I just have a quick.
Okay.
I just wanted to mention too, Mark, I'm not gonna be able to attend next week's meeting because of work. So I don't know if any of the
2 weeks from now.
2 weeks, if any of the other board members are able to attend, or obviously reach out to me if you guys need anything.
Well, Cindy's there, right?
It's for the Friends group.
And if I could just add on to your report, Mark, if I read it right, this will mark the Friends' 60th anniversary of providing service to the library. Is that right?
It's this year, 1959 to 2019.
Well, that's terrific. So thank you very much for continuing that tradition. And the other thing I wanted to clear up is that I've seen a couple of different announcements, but you confirmed it now. It's a 3-day book sale you're having, right?
Correct. So the
And-
first day is not open to the public.
Okay, so is that why it's listed as a 2-day thing,
Yes.
something? Okay, I got you.
Only to members. Okay.
All right, thank you.
Covered the district's report, didn't we?
Yeah. I can see that I jumped the gun on your reports.
So we're moving on now to the district director's report, but The way I have it here, there's a couple of comments in advance of that. Okay, we'll start with Mr. Amy.
Yes, thank you. There are several items in this report, and I wanted to touch on one that Ms. Khan pointed out, the staff evaluations. I didn't see anything in the report regarding the potential of having referred this and run this through and vetted it through and gotten the approval of HR Network, that I believe is still running HR for the library district, so I would hope that's the case. And that kind of segues into the other major element of this report, which has to do with controlling legal fees through BB&K. There are some ideas that are written in a way that seem like they came directly from BB&K. And given the fact that the budget for legal services for this district is as large as it is this year, I'd like to suggest a few other ways that might be of assistance in ensuring that legal fees are kept to a minimum. Among them, as I've previously suggested, this board is not the same as the library district. It would be nice if the distinction were made legally and for the purposes of legal advice as to who BB&K is actually representing. So that there's one point of contact, for example. In the past, that had been the library director, not individual members of the board. There's been reference here previously at these meetings to board members calling up BB&K and seeking advice. During the previous administration, that was not the case, and apparently the violation of that principle led to a prior law firm summarily resigning their position as representing the district. So one point of contact would be a good idea. Another idea, as a practicing attorney, is to encourage the use of emails rather than phone calls. Phone calls can, like talking, go on and on and on and not get to the point. And of course, an attorney bills by every probably 1/10 of an hour. So the longer a conversation goes on, the more it costs. Another idea here is, and not mentioned in the director's report, is making use of every available alternative legal representation that is available to this district, including LA County Council. If you look back over the historic billings of this district, you'll find that County Council bills at a much lower rate than does BB&K and has provided extensive service in the past. Another thought would be, as you all are aware, the library district has liability insurance through, hopefully still, SDRMA. There's no mention of using such counsel in the library district's report. I don't understand why. If there's a potential workplace litigation issue, it seems like it should be run through there. And then lastly, because it has been an extremely expensive factor for this library district, it seems that every opportunity should be made and taken advantage of to contact those making Public Records Act requests, including former board members, due to the vast and expansive nature of those records requests, and ensure that those are trimmed down as much as possible before being referred to legal counsel.
And thanks,
And
Mr.
thank
Amy.
you for that.
Appreciate it. Okay, with that, we can proceed. Let's see. Mark, did you have a comment? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Between Renee and I, we'll be at 6 minutes because I'll only be 35 seconds. So I just want to, I too want to say thank you about that evaluation actually in the packet. It is not a required thing. I think it was nice that you explained that an employee group had looked at it. You know, I will tell you, many years ago, as a trustee, I asked some employees why they didn't go to SEIU, and I even encouraged them to go to SEIU and organize. They never did. But I think the idea of being open and transparent, having this evaluation that is not required by the trustees to approve, it really is a director responsibility, I believe, unless there's something else going on. But I just think it's nice and transparent, and I think if there's any employees who have not voiced to this day, this gave them an opportunity to come to this meeting to do so also. I think it'll be really good, as Betsy said, jump the gun, but I just want to thank you for it.
Thanks, Mark. All right, with that, I turn over to you, Cindy.
Okay, let's see, first I want to remind everybody that we will be closed tomorrow for our professional development day, so we're all looking forward to that. And also a reminder that next month's meeting will be on the 20th, since it'll be a week early, since the Memorial holiday is on a Monday, and we'll meet on the holiday.
Cindy, you might want to move the microphone closer to you.
Oh, sorry. Is that better?
Yeah.
Thank you. And then we also have good news on the personnel front. We are in the midst of hiring a team librarian, a full-time team librarian, so we're waiting for the agreement to be signed, but other than that, we're working with HR Network to get the agreement assigned. But we're hoping once that's done, then we will get a start date in June, so we're really excited about that. And we're also, we'll be interviewing for our page position as well. Employee evaluations, I think we've covered that, but I will say that we did share it with HR Network. And they too seem to be impressed with it, so, and I actually added a few things based on their input. And that we, before coming to the board, we also shared the evaluation form with the staff to make sure that they were aware that I was bringing it to the board, and starting this week, we'll be starting to have our supervisors fill out employee evaluations. I did, as was mentioned, I did include a memo related to legal fees, and all the things that we can do in working with BB&K to reduce our legal fees. I think this month has been somewhat of an example of that. Later on, you're going to be seeing a PowerPoint related to the Brown Act training that we're required to do, or we're expected to do. And that was actually me putting together the presentation, and it took Mr. Duran probably 10 minutes to review it and respond to it and give us some feedback. And so that was a savings in itself. We also are in the process of getting an agreement together with Avery, our recruitment firm that we agreed to, and that was another case where we had BB&K review the agreement, but then I took whatever he said, his suggestions, and actually edited the agreement myself rather than having an attorney do it. So I just want to point out that we're already doing some of the things that are recommended in this report that you have in front of you.
Can I just ask Cindy,
Yeah, sure.
to Renee's point on the single point of contact,
It's only the
aren't we
president.
already
We
doing
decided that
A long
before.
time ago. It's the
That's in
president.
place already.
right?
Yeah.
That's already.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
in
It's the
place.
president who takes care of that.
Yes, that is the practice right now. And I mean, I can put it in writing and memorialize it in this document and, edit it, so we have this as a record, but yes, that has been our practice. And then in terms of the other comment about encouraging use of email, we use email quite often, mostly email. Let's see, upcoming events, we mentioned the book sale, summer reading program is kicking off June 1st. That's a big event in the library, I can't wait for it. Our theme this year is a universe of stories, so a lot of our programming will be surrounding the space program and the 50th anniversary of Apollo 11. And I think that's it for me. If you have any questions, I should, on the back page, this is quite an honor actually. Metro has an art selection process, and they choose different local communities, and they have a competition for artists to compete. And a local artist named Leah Knecht, I don't know exactly how to pronounce her name, was the winner of that contest. And so we're going to have a reception in her honor at the library on May 18th from 2 to 4. And I think once that's done, I think they wait until they have the reception, then that poster, which is quite beautiful, and it really illustrates some landmarks in Altadena, will be plastered on buses and trains and pretty much all over the city. So it's nice attention that's being brought to Altadena through this poster contest.
I just wanted to point out the connection between Gwen's earlier suggestion about the young artist who highlighted the hidden figures, and the connection to the summer reading program theme. That makes it an even better idea
Yeah,
to get
exactly.
that art here.
That's why, when I saw it, I thought, it's a good idea.
And my comment to that, is thanks for clearing up what happens to the poster after it was signed, because I wasn't quite sure. And I talked to the Altadena Town Council about this the other night. So it gets a big unveiling then all over the city. Okay, that's really interesting to know.
That's great.
That is a big deal, so
Yeah, it is.
that's great. Any other questions? All right, so we're on to item 5C, but there's a couple of speakers in advance of that. And so,
5C,
Mark,
what is
you go
that?
first, please.
So I'm going to add a second thing to what I was going to say about it. So the A part is that since the Friends, as part of the money that goes to the library for the different programs, one of them is Poetry and Cookies, and I forgot to mention it during the Friends report, but it's coming up this Sunday. And if you haven't ever seen it, it really is a kind of a fantastic program of all these local poets from, now it's more broadened into kind of LA County. It used to only be Altadena, then Pasadena, but they've just gotten such a big response where they print a book and do all kinds of things. So if you can be here, I'm only going to be here for about 45 minutes. I have another event that day. And then the second thing is I just want to take advantage of the finance report and remind this board as you get ready to put your budget together for next year, next fiscal year, the importance of not taking all of the property tax increase, potentially setting aside some of it that could then be used to look at bonding for future. Because if you take $30,000 or $40,000 of it next year, and then of course it continues to grow and compound like compound interest, it really could pay for a bond. So I just want to continue to share that thought. I know Cindy and I have talked about how do we educate the board on that, and I think there's got to be a way to do it, but it takes some time at a board meeting or somewhere else. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Sunday, what time is that?
Sunday at 1 o'clock, I think.
One?
I have it in my calendar.
Is it 1?
I
I
think it's
can't ever make it
1
at 1.
1 to 4.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Amy.
Thank you, and not to just harp on a single subject here, but as you look at your reports, I'm sure you all noticed that this is based on the library's position in February, at least the monthly reports. And as you look at those, you'll see that the total cost of legal fees for that month exceeded the total cost of library material purchases. That would be books, DVDs, CDs, downloadables, processing costs of all those, etc. Legal fees were about $17,258, if memory serves me. The library was only able to purchase $17,100 and change in the way of library materials. Again, not to harp, but this board, I believe, started off the year with a $50,000 budget for legal fees. That was bumped up by the board's wisdom to in excess of $300,000. So you haven't actually managed to exceed the budget, but just stop and imagine what all those legal fees could do for programs for the constituents that you represent, especially those in the northwest section of Altadena where I live. And thank you.
All right, with that, we'll move on to the financial report. Nicole?
There's nothing particular of note for February of 19. Actual revenues exceed expenditures currently and still after our property tax installment. Printing revenue and our rental income are continuing to exceed budget expectations, and our passport revenue is right on track. We do expect to get a boost the last few months of the fiscal year though, as people get their passports for summer travel.
Any questions?
I have a question of definition, just because I'm still learning my way around budgets. What's the definition of ordinary income as opposed to extraordinary income? It's, for example, on page 39 or page 4 of your report, does that generally mean income, or is there some special meaning of the word ordinary?
It's ordinary as opposed to, yeah, like a grant or something like that.
Oh,
It's
okay.
just a wording. It's
Okay.
ordinary, but
Okay.
it's not anything special.
Any other questions? I have a question that could be asked now or during the budget committee report, a brief one that I have. But I'll start with it now, and that is that we will talk a little bit, or the budget committee will discuss a little bit of 10-year plan that you had mentioned in a memo. And I just wonder if we could take a minute or two to talk about that, how it's formulated, and, this is just sort of the first pass on this that you're going to present, or how detailed this gets when you looked into it.
So it's actually our firm, our CPA firm, so it's Cindy Byram and her company that is producing the 10-year projections. So she has her formulas in place. She accounts for cost of living increases, depreciation expenses, things like that.
Okay.
They're very, very rough numbers, but it does give us a good idea of if and when funding would run out, theoretically, when the parcel taxes and
Yeah,
things like
that does answer my question, because it's dealing with routine escalation in costs across the
Yes.
categories that we have currently.
Yes.
It's not getting too deep into other things that we have to bring out in our strategic plan and so on, right? Okay, good. Okay, thank you very much. We're on to item 5D now, which will be a series of committee reports, but Mark, I've got you down as a comment for 5D, is that right?
Yeah, but, when is the strategic plan consultant discussion taking place?
During the strategic planning committee report?
So maybe just at 4, or whatever that one is. I think,
So you like a pause between the budget, I'm sorry, the executive search committee and the strategic planning committee to address a contact or a comment there? Okay.
Okay.
Right, with that, we will go on to the committee reports. First one will be bylaws committee.
Well, the bylaws committee has done their job, and it is now time for, we were tasked with the whole process of updating the policies of the Altadena district. And as you noted, that they hadn't been reviewed or updated since 2006. We're calling them policies and procedures, okay? Copies were in the board report last month, and if you'd like to have a copy of those, they can see Kylan, and she'll make sure that that's taken care of for you. The only thing that was not really addressed was the social media policies. And those are there are 2 items, I believe, that Director Cleary is working on there, drafting the 2 remaining policies, addressing emails and personal devices, as well as social media and online activity. We did not address that at all in the policy and procedures, but because those are some of the things that are required and we must know when it comes to the Brown Act, so that we don't do anything to be in jeopardy of that. So we've created a day, and I believe that, are there cards back there? Did you?
I don't think we have the comment cards today, but they'll be here next Monday.
Okay.
For the special meeting.
All right. So we have established the day for next Monday. That's the 29th. Okay. And it's 6 p.m. 6 p.m. So if anybody wants to review those and come with questions as to why not, whatever, or why didn't you consider, all of those kinds of questions, please come out. That, I believe that we will put that on the website, is that right? Because any person in the community we invite you to come and help review those with us, if you haven't already. I think that ends our report, and I thank Katie for always taking care of writing all of this up for us sometimes. So that's great, thank you. But are there any questions though? But it's next Monday that we'll be talking about that, and it will be an open meeting.
My question is, when do we stop calling them bylaws and start calling them policies and procedures?
They told us.
After they're approved.
Okay,
After
Yeah.
they're.
I thought so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So hopefully, the idea is that we do, a full review of everything, and then the so-named bylaws committee, you can bring back,
The policies.
a policy, submission with all the conversations that we have taken into account for the May meeting, and then we can vote on it then, approve it then, and be
Right.
done with that process. That's the plan.
And you did get rid of the telegram reference in there, right?
We have to, yeah, the Penny Express portion will remain, it's pretty irrelevant. No, but basically, it was.
And county council has reviewed these,
Yeah.
so we're pretty clear now.
All right, the bylaws committee is me, I'm the chair of that, along with Betsy, and there's not much to report.
Sorry,
now.
you mean budget committee.
But-
sorry?
You said bylaws, you mean budget.
committee.
I'm sorry, I meant budget, yeah. And there's nothing to report except that we are closing in on a meeting date. This is a standing committee, so it'll be open to the public, and we will publish the agenda as soon as we nail that down. It's between a couple of dates right now, we're working on the schedule. But that's coming up soon, and it sounds like we're ready to go with the first pass of the budget, and we'll take it from there. Any questions on that? Okay. Next is executive search.
Right, so there is a print report that I believe there are copies of on the back table, and each of you have one as well. So since our last meeting, where last we left our heroes, we had reviewed the proposals we had received from our RFP. At the last meeting, Terry and I had, along with Cindy's help, of course, had narrowed it down to 2 finalists, Avery Associates and Bob Murray and Associates. So after that meeting, Cindy did an amazing job of contacting all of the references of both those final candidates. There were some questions that were generated in our discussion at our last meeting that we needed clarified, and she contacted the principals of the firms to get answers to those questions. And after that process was completed, Terry and I did Skype interviews with the 2 principals of each of these firms, and we were very impressed with both of them, and felt assured that we could not make a wrong decision or a bad decision. Really, both of them were highly qualified and capable of conducting our search for us or with us. But we did feel in the end that Avery was a better match for our organization and kind of our vision of how we see this process going. So that's the decision that we made, that we had board permission to do from our last meeting. So Paul Kimura, who is the principal, who will be our contact person and the person working with us on the search, drafted a contract. And we received that contract on April 15th. As Cindy mentioned earlier, we did ask for a quick legal review from Ruben Duran from Best and Krieger, who did have some significant edits that Cindy then took and incorporated into the draft agreement, returned it to Paul, and we're expecting it back anytime now for us to be able to have his signature and then Terry's signature so we can have an official relationship and get started with our process. So within the first month after that has been executed, Paul provided this timeline of some of the activities that he's going to be concentrating on during that first month. He'll meet individually with each one of us, trustees, create a recruitment announcement. Yeah, I know, way ahead of myself. Create postings for web announcements, start a target list for outreach, and then start some LinkedIn, email, and direct phone contact with potential candidates. We've had some discussion here and certainly in our committee about public input. That's certainly a major part of the process that we're going to be concerned about. So once Avery has signed the dotted line, we'll be looking into the various options that they can help us with. We did hear a lot about that in our Skype interview, and we're happy with the kinds of suggestions and the kind of conversation that we had about that. We have also talked here at our board meetings about, as much as we can, coordinating amongst our committees so that we don't duplicate our efforts, and we'll kind of solidify those ideas as we go. One topic that we talked about in our Skype interviews was our salary range and the degree to which we could be considered competitive in the salaries that are in our scale. So Avery will, take a look at kind of a rough evaluation of where we stand, and it may be that based on what he finds both in his own investigation and in looking at some evaluation that Cindy's already done, kind of a informal salary survey that she's done, he may recommend that we consider doing a more formal salary survey, just so that we kind of know where we stand in terms of the marketplace. So that completes my report. Any questions for me?
So, just so I'm kind of clear on the timeline, so they have the agreement, they're gonna sign it and get it back. So when do you anticipate Avery being able to kick off?
Immediately when
Right,
it's
right.
signed. Right, yeah, no, that's just the shoe that we're waiting to drop.
Okay, thank you.
So, that means that we can probably all expect to hear from him pretty quickly, maybe through Cindy. I don't know how he's gonna do that, but as far as scheduling these individual meetings with us, should happen very quickly after that.
Great, okay, thank you.
Just a comment from me. I viewed Paul as a person that he's committed as a principal to being our sole contact and leading the process and not, going back and forth between associates and the firm. So I felt pretty good about his leadership and commitment on it too.
Thanks for mentioning that, and that reminds me to point out, anybody who read the proposals in great detail might notice that he wasn't the one that they named. It was going to be William Avery, who was going to be assigned to us or committed to working with us. But in the reference checking process and in just my own contacts in the library world, it sure started to seem like, as far as library recruitments, Paul was the one who had the most experience with that. The other principal in the firm, certainly lots of experience and certainly capable, I'm sure, but we just felt like Paul's knowledge of a library context was a really strong asset that he could bring, and so we asked if he could be the one that we worked with, even though he's based more in Northern California and the other one is Southern California. We just felt that the expertise was really, really important for our search.
All right, thanks, Betsy. We'll pause here for a comment from Mark now before we get on to the Strategic Planning Committee.
I'd like you sometimes to consider allowing the speaking for public comment, if possible, to be done afterwards. As an example, after hearing some of the good things that Betsy said, I have some comments, but I don't want to go back on executive search on that. So on strategic planning, Am I to assume, or is the public, to assume that and I don't know if you can answer this right now, but that the green is the recommended and the yellow might be the second, and the other ones are the rest? Is that what's going on with this direction?
Basically, yeah, it's a sort of rough preliminary.
So, and I left my phone there, but, you know, looking at, and I don't know Margaret Sullivan, and I obviously didn't read the proposals, but just speaking from someone who's been through at least 2 strategic plans at this library, and some other things at this library, but strategic plans in public agencies over my years. And I don't think correct me if I'm wrong, this person's not local. Is this person out of state?
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, and I will just say, you know, I did not know that Brian's thing was called Leading Change. I wasn't even worried about that. I was just looking at some of the other ones. But having someone local, you know, and I mean at least Southern California based, someone who truly at least knows special districts, maybe, but somebody that really knows how to work a community for a strategic plan. Because looking at the website of Sullivan was space and all that. And we did, during the 2009 strategic plan, a whole bunch of space issues here that go along with ADA, those kind of things. I mean, I'm just not, you're going to take a vote tonight, I would assume, because we've got to move on this thing, I know that. But I just don't know if that's the right one, and I just share that from experience, and I apologize of not being around any earlier. This has been the last 6 weeks have been kind of busy for me on some other things, so if you could hold off, or if there was some discussion on where the other ones might lie, I think there might be some value with that. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Okay, with that, let's move on to the report for that committee.
Okay. So the big matter before the Strategic Planning Committee, obviously this month, is selecting and, you know, looking at the results of the RFP process that we started last month. And we had 7 submissions come in, 7 proposals come in, and I believe there was an 8th that came in after the deadline that unfortunately we weren't able to consider. So what we wanted to do was present, you know, you guys have copies of all of the proposals, and I believe there are copies on the back table, or there will be, as well, so that everybody has a chance to look through. And I should say that, you know, not only were we really impressed with the number of submissions that we received, but with just the overall quality of them, that we got a lot of submissions. They were very good. They, you know, really represented a diversity of approaches to strategic planning, and I think, you know, that starts to come out in some of the comments that are in the search matrix. And so Cindy and I had an opportunity to sit down for quite some time and review all the proposals and sort of talk through what we felt like the strengths and the weaknesses of each, you know, of each option were. So I'd like to talk through those a little bit and get some input from you guys before we sort of move forward, for a couple of reasons. One, because I want to make sure that whoever we end up selecting as a board is somebody that everybody feels like brings a lot of value to the table, but also to kind of echo some of the concerns we've had earlier about not duplicating work, about making sure that, you know, who we're selecting for is really adding value and not, you know, replicating efforts that are being undertaken by other outside contractors or other committees. So, like I said, this is a very sort of rough ranking, and so starting, I think I'd like to start actually under the top 2. I want to come back to those in a minute, but I'd like to start and just very briefly talk through some of these proposals and what the pros and cons are. And if you guys have questions as I go along, please stop me. So, Roush Communication Consultants, RCC, is run by a guy named Martin Roush, who does a lot of strategic planning consulting work for CSDA. He's a big special districts guy. If you look at his list of clients and his proposal, you'll see, I don't know, 100 some odd special districts throughout the state of California. So he has really extensive experience, and, you know, prepared a really professional proposal, very detailed, very comprehensive. But as you can see, the price point is quite high, and really, I think, includes maybe more than we need. The other issue with him was that they just don't have that much experience with libraries. There's just not, I mean, they have a ton, like I said, a ton of special district experience, no question enough qualifications there, but very little to no library experience. Which is, you know, we are a special district, but we're a library first, and I think that that's really critical. Were there any questions on that proposal? I want to give you guys a couple of seconds. I know you haven't had a chance to kind of look through necessarily everything in great detail, but I do want to make sure we talk about it.
I'm noticing under Amanda Green's description as an affiliate, that she lists Placentia Library District, but that's not on the list for, is it Placentia in LA County?
Placentia is, no, Orange County. It's
Orange County.
And they're a special district. It
Oh,
was
yeah,
one of the
there it
questions
is.
that we had, because Placentia was listed
Elsewhere as well.
elsewhere also in Brent Ives' proposal, and so it wasn't totally clear what process they had gone through, or who they had retained, or how that had worked out, but.
Well, and she's an affiliate or a contractor. I wonder if she worked as an affiliate or a contractor with the other contractor on that.
That was our question as well, but at the end of the day, it was still the only sort of evidence of any library experience, which we felt like that's not sufficient. Okay. Any other questions on this one?
Forgive me if you've already said this, or if it's even in the, if it's in the matrix, but did you get a sense from all of them about
Which side, or which one?
how quickly
Which one are you
this
asking about?
goes, this whole process goes, and
Is it?
did
Yeah,
that suit you and so on?
Right, so in the RFP,
So
one of the conditions that was laid out was the idea that we would be able to meet the September 1st deadline that we had discussed previously. You know, and there were a variety of opinions on that. Some firms felt like, sure, no problem. Some firms said that's a really tight turnaround, but everybody basically at the end of the day said, yeah, we can get it done. So what the exact, you know, sequence of events varied from firm to firm, because obviously everybody's approach was a little bit different, but everybody seemed to feel pretty confident that they could meet that September 1st goal.
And there was sort of a loose ends willingness they had to take care of any trailing issues and so on. And in other words, they were there for you for the long term, or a little longer than that if needed, just to take care of those issues.
Yeah, I mean, the deliverable at the end of this is a strategic plan
Okay.
to the board, so, you know, that's sort of the takeaway.
I guess what I'm going with that is the things that could change,
Sure.
you know, and how we have to bake some of that stuff into the strategic plan as we go along.
Right.
I can see that happening, so.
Right, and I mean, I totally agree, like, and, you know, if, sort of in the world of possibilities, if, for example, the search firm comes back at the end of August and they say, we've got somebody, and, you know, it's, like, that impacts the strategic planning process. If there's a major development in the facilities, you know, assessment, that impacts the strategic planning process as well. So, yeah, I mean, I think all of this is based on our best estimation as we have it now, and then, you know, whatever we need to do to adjust as we move along, I'm sure we can. Okay, all right. Next, on our list is leading change, which you guys should have a copy of as well.
So the next one is, it's this one, I guess. It's this one.
So this proposal was definitely in our top four, because of the extensive experience of the principal at the firm, Brian, who's sitting right out here, with the Altadena Library, right? Like, Brian was responsible for leading, in large part, the Community Conversations Project. There's a real depth of knowledge there, so a huge asset of local expertise, special district expertise, and Altadena Library specific expertise. So that was a big item in the pro column. one of the, things that we felt like was also helpful, there was a good detailed breakdown of costs and a really strong emphasis on community engagement, which is something that we had asked for, and I would say most of the firms that were further down the list did not deliver on in any meaningful way. A lot of the other proposals were very board-focused or just didn't really seem to get the idea at all. But I would say, again, in the pro column, this proposal had a really strong emphasis on how that would work, how to do it in a way that was inclusive and, really reached out to the entire community. At the end of the day, I think the concern with this one was very similar actually to the concern with Roush, which was just a lack of experience with other library systems and other library districts and sort of libraries generally. There were members of the team who had really interesting public health and community engagement qualifications, but again, looking at a depth of expertise in libraries was a concern. So we felt like, unfortunately, there just wasn't quite enough library experience in this one. But I'd love to answer any questions that you guys might have on that. All right. The other proposals, moving down the list, Bridge Innovate, that's the one that's in your white folder. This. So this firm has done a previous strategic plan for a library system. I think it's Chattanooga, public library system, if I'm not mistaken. And so, that's cool. Unfortunately, it seemed like they are a very corporate consulting group, and that most of their experience is with much larger institutions like universities and research organizations, mostly in the Southeast, which is not necessarily a problem, but we didn't feel like they made any effort really to tailor their proposal to what we do and what we're interested in and what we're about as a district. So in theory, it met all the requirements, but it seemed pretty clear that they didn't really have much of a sense of what was going on locally with us.
Where are they based?
They are based in Tennessee,
Tennessee.
I think. Yes. Or at least most of their principals are in Tennessee and Georgia, so they're definitely southeastern US.
Did they talk about how they would get face-to-face with us? I mean, do they have people out here?
Nope, they would get on a plane.
Okay.
And so that is a big concern for anybody who's not local, right? And which echoes a little bit back to what you were saying, Marcus. Not just a lack of local expertise, but, added expenses for travel and for figuring out how that works. So, the advantages of going with somebody who's based here are quite evident. So the decision will be whether, what the trade-offs are, cost benefit. So, yeah, they don't have anybody local. Okay? All right, trying to move as, kind of rapidly as I can. So, BHI, again, is the principal's a guy named Brent Ives, who does a lot of work for CSDA. He's kind of another special district guy. And again, BHI has done a ton of consulting. I don't know that's necessarily well reflected in the proposal, which is, I think, probably the shortest and least comprehensive one that we received. But they have done a lot of strategic planning with other special districts. But again, sort of like the problem we had with Roush, just very limited to no library experience. They also mentioned Placentia, but we don't know in what context that work occurred. Limited community engagement, very board-focused, pretty generic. There were just a lot of typos and grammatical issues. So it didn't seem like a whole lot of care and effort went into this proposal, which was disappointing. So.
You lost me at typos.
Yeah, well.
She got lost in.
Cindy can tell you I was not kind in my grammatical notes. Yeah, it's very intense. But no, I mean, at the end of the day, we want somebody who's engaged and interested and wants to be a part of this process with us, and that just didn't seem to be the case here, so, fair enough. And then the last one on this side, oh, here we go, is, your big book with the puzzle pieces on the front, wildcard strategy. So this is a one consultant operation, run by a guy named Jim McComb, who has done a ton of strategic planning, but it's almost exclusively private industry, like it's all private sector strategic planning. It's very, he's got a lot of experience with financial institutions. He does have a letter of recommendation in here from the Orange County Cemetery District, which is nice, but no library experience, no public agency experience. Just a very different kind of strategic planning that I think what we're looking for.
He did customize each one to each one of us, because I got Gwen's and Gwen got Jason's. It says, presented to Gwendolyn McMullins,
Yeah,
trustee.
has your name on it.
As long as it puts in that much effort.
Yeah.
It's a lot of effort with that.
It was a lot of effort. And very detailed, it was a 10-phase strategic planning process, which like, again, you know, it's a different approach, but it just didn't seem to be a particularly good fit with what we need, or to have the library experience that's, I think, really important as we're sort of moving into a new phase of things here. So,
My only question is a cemetery district a special district, or?
Yeah.
Orange
talked
County
to-
Cemetery District is a special district, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, there are like 30,000 special districts in the state of California, and they are every kind of thing, from
Everywhere.
fire districts, cemetery
Water.
districts, to
Oh, okay.
whatever. We're actually like the least common kind library districts. There are only 13 of us. Municipal water districts, that kind of thing, much more common.
There's that many cemetery districts?
There's more of them than there are libraries, yeah. Well, because if you think about like little towns, right, that
That's
may not, that are just like unincorporated in the middle of, you know, kind of nowhere, there are things that you would want to handle locally that you would care about in the cemetery or, you know, fire services are often.
It's nice he broke this down into phases.
All right. So back up to the two at the top. So, I'm gonna kind of talk about these with you guys and get your eyes on them. So, Margaret Sullivan, which is this one, the ring-bound ones. There were a couple of things that stood out. The first was, and I think that this is true of both of these submissions, is just the really extensive experience with library strategic planning. So, you know, their projects have included everything from the Richland Library System in South Carolina to the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Library in Washington, D.C., to, I think most notably for us, the Las Vegas Clark County Library District. And one of the associates who is part of the 3-person team spent 10 years working at that library system. So there is sort of a, I mean, I know it's not California, but there is sort of a regional tie-in to sort of West Coast library processes. A lot of what also stood out was just a really strong commitment to community engagement, to outreach, to finding ways of bringing people to the table that we thought were inclusive and innovative and interesting. I should say also that Margaret Sullivan and Leading Change were the only 2 proposals we received who noted that one of their main principles on the project had Spanish, had a native Spanish speaker or a fluent Spanish speaker, so that we could, you know, leverage that as well through the process, which I think is hugely important. So these guys have, like I said, a lot of experience with library-specific strategic planning, are sort of pretty, you know, well regarded in library circles. Is that right, Cindy? I'm saying this, like I'm saying this because you said it to me, and so I'm
Well,
saying it.
I mean, on that point, I know someone who worked with them in Las Vegas, and actually that's how they ended up proposing.
And I think, you know, the major concerns here that jumped out were sort of twofold. One would be that, you know, just on the cost side, we would need to get a much more detailed breakdown of what exactly their cost outline is and why it is what it is, and what their expenses are anticipated to be. Their cost proposal was not as detailed as some of the other ones we received, which is a problem, so we would need to do some follow-up to figure out what that looks like, how that could be modified. And then, you know, the other thing that I think would be really valuable is to make sure that we're not duplicating work with facilities, right? Because there is a facilities RFP, and Jason, I'm sure you could speak to this better than I could, that involves space planning, and we would want to make sure that whatever we're doing, you know, if we were to go with these guys, is not duplicating work that we're asking somebody else to do, you know, on the facilities side, and that we can kind of get the best of all possible worlds. But I will say that, you know, I thought their proposal was very strong. I think that some additional follow-up is definitely needed, and I would want to dive into it a bit more, but I thought it was a very strong option.
I almost think, just the initial look through on the previous work they've done is so heavy on, frankly, facilities-based stuff. My gut tells me, I hope they plan on applying for the facilities RFP, because it would be interesting to have a firm like this that knows so much about libraries, and most of the work seems to have been more on facility stuff than on program.
Yeah, well, and maybe the case is that we can, you know, sort of even find a way of kind of combining those contracts or those projects into one thing. Certainly we budgeted for two separate things, but I think if, you know, there can be synergies, as we talked about all the way along, between obviously our facilities planning and our strategic planning, that's I think a net benefit.
I think another item is finance. We need to start thinking about some financing options going forward. It'd be nice if folks had that kind of feedback, not necessarily put it in the plan, but, you know, have some experience with that.
Yeah.
May I, Terry? This is impressive. I mean, the depth of experience with libraries is astonishing. I think it's kind of telling that the name of her firm is a studio, and that the whole thing is really discussed in terms of design. That's kind of that's not kind of what I would have gone out to look for strategic planning, even though it's clear that they do strategic planning in the overall work that they do with libraries. I have a concern about them being based in New York.
Yeah, me too.
And this just feels almost, almost feels too rich for our blood, you know?
Right.
And I am concerned, very concerned about the very, very thin not even one page thing
Yeah.
about cost. I mean, I don't know how they came up with $30,000.
Nor do I. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm very, very impressed, but I'm also reluctant, I gotta say.
So let's talk briefly about the other proposal that we haven't talked about yet. So this is from Joseph Matthews, who you know, also was a sort of top of list finisher for, again, just huge depths of experience in libraries. You know, he's not exclusively focused on strategic planning, but has done a ton of strategic planning. He has, if you look at his list of publications, I mean, he's written a book called Strategic Planning and Management for Library Managers. Like, there's a lot of experience here, and he's worked with a lot of libraries in our region. So unlike Sullivan, he is local, he works in Carlsbad and charges a day rate, so the cost that you see on his option is substantially less, right? So it's if not it is the least expensive of the proposals that we received, which is always a bonus. And it seems like he has a pretty good understanding of what we've asked for. He's got a timeline that lays it out,
Yes.
and a good community outreach, process. I would say that it probably is not as creative as some of the community outreach processes that we saw in some of the other proposals, but it definitely seems to be solid, and it does everything that we asked for, for a consultant to do. So I think, this is sort of the other end of the bell curve from Sullivan, so it's why we wanted to bring both of these to you guys, because I think they have very different approaches, but both undeniable experience in libraries, I think undeniable value add in terms of library expertise, so I would say certainly, at the very top of the list as well.
May I ask for a point of clarification?
Sure.
There's another agenda item for actually new business. Is the plan to vote on it tonight or to take it to the group on Sunday? That's what I did, I wasn't clear.
Right, I got you, I see what you're saying. So the plan is to follow a similar procedure that we followed with the executive search firm to kind of clarify any concerns or questions or follow-up that the board might want Cindy or myself to conduct, and then empower us to go ahead and make a selection so that we don't have to wait until May to do that, to bring it back. The agenda item is on there basically so that we can take an action if it turns out that we need to do something else or more due diligence is required or we want to table it, then that can happen too.
I hate to table it.
Yeah, I would
I'd like
as
to
well,
use the
but-
model that you just said, and for that reason, maybe we need to give you our, top 3 or 4 comments about it. And if you
Well,
don't
and
mind, I'll.
yeah,
You've
and I
seen
wanna
my-
make sure
Have
that-
you been to Sierra Madre Library? It's an
You know,
interesting one.
Like I said, that this is, something that you guys have a chance to ask any questions you might want to ask, and I just want to be really clear about the process that we went through, and represent that fairly. And obviously, when we get to the agenda item, we can kind of talk about the specifics of moving forward at that point, but I do want to make sure everybody gets a fair shake and that we get a chance to really talk through pros and cons, and if you disagree with this ranking, that is totally valid, and let's talk about it.
I'm down with this ranking, in that I agree that these are the two to consider. I mean, meaning that I guess I would not feel as comfortable with any of the other choices. So and that's just my reaction to the matrix. If you want to save discussion of how to move forward with the selection process, I'll wait.
Yeah,
With other
let's save that just till we get to the action item. I think that probably belongs there more properly.
Okay, good.
But if there are any other sort of broad process questions, yeah, please.
So since, even though I'm technically on the committee, I missed the first 2 meetings, so was this reviewed with the community part, or?
No, so the committee, the strategic planning committee hasn't met since the RFP responses came in. So that meeting is happening on, happening on Sunday. And certainly, their input is important to this process as well, but at the end of the day, it is a board decision.
Yeah.
And I wanted, because this is the sort of one opportunity we have to discuss as a board, before May, I think it's really critical that we get your input and your eyes on this as well.
So I guess, my personal opinion, having read through the packets a little bit, I personally would take Margaret Sullivan off as far as a top choice for a few reasons. One, like I said, I would be really excited to get their proposal on the facility side of things. It seems to me that's frankly where all of their experience is, if you look at those projects. In addition to some of the concerns that Betsy raised, I'm not sure if that's the best strategy for us, especially when we have essentially two local firms. I think the Joseph Matthews one is really strong. I think it'd be interesting to reach out to folks at San Jose State to get some additional feedback on him. He's local. The price is, hey, anytime you can come in below budget, right?
Yeah.
And then, frankly, I don't think an argument needs to be made for why Leading Change should be in the running. Again, local firm, not a ton of library experience, but knows the district. I think there's been enough discussion on, I think the one thing that, regardless of how we decide to move forward tonight, I think the one thing that we would have to make sure this process addresses is, obviously if you go back through the meetings over the last year or so, there's folks within the community that felt that there were some pieces missing from the last strategic plan. So we've got to make sure that whatever we do, whoever we move forward with, that there's a clear plan and strategy to make sure that we're reaching out to every corner of the community and getting input where we haven't gotten it before. So that would be my feedback on this list. I could talk about why I don't think the others should be considered, but I don't think that's necessary use of time.
Yeah, and I think you're right about the inclusiveness. I think that's the sort of the rationale behind assembling the community committee as well, is making sure that that's, that this is not exclusively a board-centered process. It is a community-facing, community-centered process where we're asking people to come to the table. And so I think getting feedback from the strategic planning committee will be helpful as well. And I agree that, budgetary concerns, local knowledge concerns are both certainly important. And there's a huge amount of value in those.
So a couple thoughts from me.
Yeah.
I think having somebody local, at least within, a short plane flight away or whatever, is good. I'm a little, I'm not sure about Margaret Sullivan's studio for the reasons that have already been explained. I think somebody that is dedicated to going one-on-one with us and not farming it off to an associate or somebody else in the firm is really crucial. I like the Joseph Matthews proposal from the sense that a lot of the work that goes into the strategic planning process has already been done by you and your committee, right? So having somebody that's the pro, that you can help guide you through the process, is going to be really sort of an amendment to what you already know, if you know what I'm saying. So I like that idea of somebody that's engaged, but not sort of too engaged, if you know what I mean. So those would be the things that are important to me. Somebody that's got the experience, that's local, that stays engaged and has a one-on-one relationship.
I concur with that, especially the local, someone who's local and who has the experience. I would concur with that. Matthew stands out. And there's another kid over here.
So Katie, is the next step then to table this to the action item?
Right, so, yeah, so I think the next step would be, to sort of, when we get to the action item, to talk about what we'd like to do
Okay.
to move it forward, but if there's any other discussion or questions or, process things we wanna talk about.
There is one from the public, and then Bridget had a late card in here to talk.
I'm sorry, I know it's.
Oh, I didn't mean to brand it as late, I'm just saying that that's the explanation.
No, I have another thing I have to do too, so I couldn't make the afternoon. I just want to say, as I have said to this board in past times, it's always difficult for me to take off the lens of the foundation. Given this, the experience that the community has had in this past 2 years, 18 months, I just want to caution you, be very careful of how you allocate the funds for whoever you have, and be very careful about having someone who does not intimately know this community, because it will matter. I think you're addressing that effectively through the members that you're having on the strategic planning committee. They'll hold your feet to the fire in terms of understanding and listening to what the community has to say. In terms of what you spend for a consultant, you know, without a doubt, that will be looked at through microscopes, every kind of lens. So when, as a foundation, we're out asking donors to support our library, I mean, the question already coming up is, so tell me again how much they spend on legal fees? And getting them to understand, I'm not raising money, we're not raising money for legal fees, But the questions get asked, that's in people's minds all the time. And I just want to encourage you to think very carefully about this as you choose whomever you decide to choose. Thank you.
Thank you. There's a couple of more comments. Mark, do you have one as
Can
well?
I just finish 45 seconds of my first time?
Sure.
I was at 2 minutes. I just gotta say, I'm almost sure, don't you speak Spanish? You do? So Brian speaks Spanish, if that was an issue with whatever one you were talking about, that they had a person that spoke Spanish.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, somebody, I thought there was a comment on that somewhere in there. Again, Gwen, maybe you can remember, I'm trying to think back in the 2008, 2009, when we did that one that went through 2013, that we were on that committee on. But I think the actual entities, the people that were proposing to be the strategic plan facilitators, either came to the strategic committee and then a recommendation of 2 or 3 were forwarded to the full board, or they spoke at a board of trustee meeting so that people could hear and then say something. So I would almost think, I mean, Joe Matthews is good. I heard Jason, you say something about, it is possible. I don't know what the name of your firm thing is, but Brian's company, and if I think there was a third one that seemed a little more local. Looking at that and maybe having them come and talk, or have those proposals. So maybe you allow 3, you get authority to go to 3. But I also think, what was the amount of money that was allocated for the strategic plan?
I think it was 30,000, am I right? Yeah, it was
30,000? So you just gotta make sure you also keep that in mind, because I don't think you should ask for more money, but, so that you stay within that proposal. Thank you for that extra time.
Okay, thank you.
So that concludes our report.
Yeah, thank you for that. All right. The next report then is facilities, and I want to make sure that I haven't blown up any comment cards. I got one from Brian Beery for 7B, is that right, Brian? Okay. And I've got one from Mary for 9. You good?
Unless you wanted to change it to another one. I kind of thought I was going to be on the agenda tonight, so.
Okay.
It's
let
really
us
an
get-
announcement.
Pardon me?
It's more of an announcement
Okay.
than an action item.
The facilities report, I don't believe is gonna take very long. Why don't we just do that, and before we get into our trustee reports, we'll have you come up and make the announcement, okay? Okay, good.
So on the facilities, again, there's no recommended action items tonight. We're not there yet. But I guess frankly, what I view as some good news here. If folks remember back to the meeting, the same meeting where we approved the budget for the RFP for strategic planning, we approved an RFP budget for the facilities. At the time, our focus was on two big priorities. One being ADA issues across both branches, and the second being really a total renovation of the Bob Lucas branch. And the idea being there is we felt like, looking at the facilities assessment that was done, that those are two areas we feel like within our budget we could cover without too much stress. But as Cindy has been working on actually drafting the RFP, in her research, one of the things that she has figured out, quite frankly, is that within that budget we've already approved, we believe we'd be able to do a complete plan, including pretty much everything that's been identified in the facilities assessment. Part of the reason, obviously, we feel like we can do that within the budget is the facilities assessment's already done. So a lot of that background work that a firm would have to do, we've already got. The other part of it is too, and I know this has been discussed. Our facilities manager, when he gave his presentation of the report last year, brought this up. There's this, the other complication with doing this much renovation is if you aren't looking at it holistically, you can end up in situations where you spend many thousands of dollars on something and then find out you have to tear it up to do this next thing. In my mind, one of the first things I think about is I know that in the facilities assessment, there's some mainline issues with, I believe it's the water supply that we know are going to have to be dealt with coming off of Mariposa. But we also know with the ADA issues, there's a lot of access stuff from Mariposa. So it would be a really bad idea to only look at ADA, spend a huge amount of money on the front entrance, and then have to tear it up to put in like a new water line, right? So the only thing really to report tonight is we're just going to expand, without changing the budget obviously, expand the scope of the RFP and hopefully get in some plans that address all of the facilities issues. And again, one of the major things we want to be focused on here is whatever RFPs whatever we get back, RFP is going to be clear that we want a phased-in approach, so that we can, again, with the budget committee and others are looking at this, they could be thinking pretty far down the line. I think, Mark, to your point too of the bond issues and all that, I don't think we can really look at that until we have a phased-in, clear design plan that addresses everything. So that's really where we stand on the facilities committee. Hopefully, sometime soon, I'll be able to have a nice fancy sheet like this too. Questions? Anything else you want to?
Jason, could you just remind us who's on the facilities committee?
Myself and Terry with Cindy, obviously.
I mean, the only thing I will add is that we have an RFP draft that once the committee and I have a little bit of a discussion, will be complete, and hopefully we can get it out next week.
Okay.
My comment on all of this is that I don't believe that we need any more action to this, that this is something that's a bit approved from a fiscal point of view, and simply adding a little more information to the scope of it. And that was actually at the behest of the people that sort of originally looked at this, right? Some of the planners who got involved. So I think that, I'm good to go on this unless the board feels that we need a vote to change this. Okay.
I don't think we'll have an action item until we actually get the proposals back.
Okay, yeah, I agree with that. So, no more questions? And I'll have Mary come forward and make her announcement.
tell you I'm Mary Landau, and I'm representing Christmas Tree Lane. Can you tell? A request came to us a couple of years ago, asking if we would consider lighting the 3 deodora trees that are in your parking lot. And because we use your facilities so much, because it's just such a wonderful time and the involvement. So we decided unanimously to approve the funding for the lights of 3 deodora trees in the parking lot.
Thank you. Thank you.
This would include the 2 box trees. One of them's not doing too well, but hopefully. Anyway, the one that's at the end of the parking lot is the 3rd one. The cost shall not exceed $2,500 for all supplies and lightings of the 3 deodora trees. This action is contingent on receiving volunteer assistance from the library to make the lines. So we actually make the lines. We have all the parts. This will help to pay for all those parts. But we need volunteers to help. So we've thought, with all your resources, perhaps it'll work. And then Altadena Library will provide the new power supply for the tree in the back of the parking lot. So I wanted you to know that we approved it, and I don't know if there's anything else I have to do for you other than probably give you time for when we could get together as the days to put the line building.
What does that mean exactly? Make the lines, I don't know.
Okay, so you have a line, I think it has to be twisted. I've never done it myself.
You're talking about
The
the
cords
lights
with
themselves.
the lights on them, and you have to attach the sockets, and then that's called line building, and there's a certain amount of sockets, a certain distance apart for each line. So we talked it over, and we thought with extra help, we could get it done in about 4 to 6 half days. So it'll take a while, but it'll be really great.
Mary, I think that's a terrific idea, and it's thanks so much for thinking about us. The pesky problem of insurance and liability that always raises its head on this sort of thing. So if the meeting hasn't already happened with Cindy and with Jonathan and the folks that are, that bear the responsibility for all this, because you got people climbing trees and all that stuff.
They won't be climbing trees to build the lines.
Okay,
And the tree climbing part, that will be done by a professional.
okay. Has there been a planning meeting of some sort that's been done with the library already?
Well, I think that we just had Jonathan at our committee, but I was supposed to come today to let you know that we had approved it, and then I think you take it from there.
Okay.
But, let us
Can I
know.
just say, it's been discussed for about a year, and I think Jonathan has been the focal point, the focus from, because
Yes.
the discussion actually took place
It's
right
2
after
years.
December of 2017 in there, because the Friends thought about helping contribute. So there's been a discussion about this for a pretty good long time.
Yeah, this is an operational thing all the
Yeah.
way. We shouldn't even be talking about it, except for the fact that there's liability involved and we should be
Yeah.
involved. So I would say if you solve that problem, then I
But
think it's wonderful.
Mary, there's the distance from here to that back wall back there is isn't that quite a distance there?
It is, but that's why there would be a separate electrical
Outlet.
drop of 20 amps. So he would just run it off of in the back parking lot, or in the back part of the parking lot,
Okay.
there's an electrical panel back there.
Okay.
And so I think the idea is they would just draw the electricity from there. So it's not gonna take any additional amperage. It all fits within the scope of the library, I think. Like I said, they've been talking, Jonathan was here, I don't know.
Yes, this is all done with Jonathan's knowledge and support.
Okay.
So just to let you
Good.
know, and then I know it has to go through the board, so I just wanted you to know before your fiscal year ended, that was really important, we heard.
Okay.
Okay?
I would say the next step is, Cindy, you should let us know, and if we need to do anything on the next agenda for approvals or whatever, we'll get that done, Mary.
Okay,
Thanks so
thank
much, this
you.
is really
Thank you.
terrific.
Yeah, thank you, Mary, that's really cool.
Okay. So trustee reports, and
Are we going to vote on
if you don't mind, I'd like to start at that end of the table and work over here. Is that okay, Gwen?
It's later.
It's
here.
perfectly okay. Actually, I don't have any items to report, except that there was an African-American Young Women's Conference that was at PCC last week, I guess. We're forgetting the dates now, on the 13th. We had about 500 or more young people from all over Southern California. And if you know of any young people, I'm engaged with AAUW, which will have a science day for middle girls this coming Saturday, the 27th. So if you know anybody, tell them to come on down there. And it's a hands-on, okay?
Thanks, Gwen.
Just a couple things. I'm gonna just give another shout out to the poetry event on Sunday, and also mention, in case people don't know, that Altadena actually has 2 poet laureates, one of whom came to my school 2 weeks ago, which was lovely. Hazel Harrison came as part of a poetry celebration that we do at South Pass Middle School, and she was generous enough to come and share her poetry with our students. Once again, 1 to 4 o'clock here on Sunday. And also, just a little fun thing, maybe you saw the Altadiddy event on the calendar. I actually got to perform. It was really fun. I wrote a song about Altadena, along with a lot of other people who did, and I'll just tell you for the record, the funniest of them all is called "There Ain't No Dairy Here." But it was a really, really fun event, and I just love that we got to be the place where that happened. It was really fun.
Great.
That's a good one. Happens to me all the time, somebody from Altadena, oh, they got a dairy there, right? For me, a couple things of note. I'd mentioned before that I was going to speak at Montecedro, and I did last Friday. Had a real good turnout, and we had a lot of folks after my presentation asking a lot of good questions and giving a lot of good feedback about the library. And I guess that's what I wanted to pass on, is that we had lots of handshakes and folks coming up to me and saying that they appreciate the job that the library is doing and the board and so on. There were some good questions in there, some of which I passed on to Stella in a conversation the other day. So it was very rewarding, and it reminded me of how much we all need to reach out to the community, live if we possibly can, and work on getting those advocates that we're going to need when we have to vote on, Measure A again and all that stuff that's going on. The other thing is that I was invited to the Neighbors for Building Better Altadena about a week ago on Saturday, and I was on a small panel about starting a newspaper again in Altadena. And they asked me to come because of my previous experience decades ago, but still some interesting story and perspective on what was going on back then at Altadena's last paper, actually. It was a weekly paper that became the Pasadena Weekly. And Larry Wilson, pretty sure that's his name, was the other panelist, a really interesting guy. He currently works for the Star News and that conglomerate of papers that they have. And we told him what we thought about newspapers in Altadena, which is sort of a risky situation given that it's the future of print media. But I'll tell you, the folks at that meeting really are serious about this, and the next meeting was to talk about it a little bit more. So those of you that are interested in a journalism career out there might be something starting up for you.
Thank you.
And then I did talk to the Altadena Town Council at their meeting and gave the announcements and so on. Of note, worth noting is the idea or the fact that their election's coming up in June. I'm not sure that they have a full slate of candidates. There's a candidate outreach program going on right now. And they've got a whole series of events that you can find at their website about early voting and election day and candidate applications and so on. So if you're interested in what's happening over there, check their website and you'll get a good dose of that. So that was my last week.
Cool.
All right, so two quick things. My guess is most of the library staff are already aware of this, but Pasadena in October is actually hosting the California Public Library Association Conference. And so, I am unfortunately out of the country, but in my mind, I'm like, well, this is like, there's gotta be a way for us to like capitalize on this for little Altadena. So I just want to, like, I'm assuming people are already thinking about that, but I want everybody, it's far enough in advance, we've got plenty of time to think about what's something fun and creative we can do. We're gonna have people from all over California, public libraries in, right down the hill, so I feel like there's something we could do, like bring them up here or do something, right? And then I did just another kind of community announcement. For those that don't know, my second passion is trail work and trail maintenance here around Altadena, especially anything affiliated with Mount Wilson, through the Mount Wilson Bicycle Association. So since we brought up pancake fundraisers, if you really, really like pancakes, there's a second pancake fundraiser in May. The only challenge is it is a bicycle association, so you need to find a way to get yourself the 2.5 miles up to Henninger Flats, which is a LA County fire station, actually. But if you can make it up there, it's on May 19th. It's our largest fundraiser, and there's usually, 600 plus people that come out.
Mostly on bikes, I presume, right?
We have a ton of hikers. We actually do, we do a lot of work with the AC 100 folks, the big, for those that don't know, that's the big trail running race for those ultra runner folks, that starts over in Wrightwood and ends here above JPL. So we usually have a lot of them come out, in addition to some of the other local trail maintenance folks.
Right.
So I've got a report and a thing, I'm not gonna go through it. The only thing that I'll say in addition is, so I went to the California Special District Association 3-day deal in San Diego, and I brought back like the book of stuff and a whole bag of stuff. So like one of the, in addition to like being able to meet people from other districts and going to all the lectures, one of the things that I thought was so cool about it was just the amount of templates, resources, ready-made options that that they hand out. And so if you want to take a look at anything, I'm happy to give it to you. You can, kind of go through, they've got everything from capital improvement plans to evaluation criteria and forms for general managers or district directors to, strategic planning stuff. So it's really a lot, it kind of covers the whole gamut of things that a district might be involved in. So I would really recommend it. I thought it was super rewarding and really interesting and well done. There's another one this year, I believe, that is basically duplicates the same process in July, I think, in Napa. And so the way it works is when you go the first time, they put you on a first time attendee track, and you go to like a set series of things that covers HR, finances, governance, all the kind of basic stuff. And then if you go again, you can, go to other sessions on other sort of more specialized topics. But I would really recommend it. I thought it was really informative. I learned a lot. I thought it was very, very well done.
Good.
All right, thank you for that. And now we've got our Brown Act refresher course.
Okay.
So we're now on the same timeline we were last meeting, but I'll still try to go through this pretty quickly. So Brown Act in the digital age, and this is a brief history of the Brown Act, so kind of when and how it started. Brown Act, we all know, business conducted in public. And then, there at the bottom, unless specifically authorized for closed session, which we talked about last month. So, talks a little bit about the changing landscape of communication and why it's so important to go over the Brown Act because, you know, communication has changed over the years. And technology as well. So, there hasn't been a lot of case law established for like social media and blogging and things like that. We know the most recent stuff was related to text messages and personal devices. So email's a big one, we all know about that. We don't have to say, I know you guys are all trained, we just have to keep going over this. So just don't hit reply all if for some reason you all were copied on an email together and it wasn't PCC'd. Just, yeah, don't hit reply all. Texting, I mean, big one is just no like group text, or don't text each other and then text a third board member to talk about the same thing. Blog, so this specifically addresses commenting on a blog. So if an elected official was to write about something and then a member of the public or another like board member commented, there's a risk of developing a discussion outside of a public meeting. So you don't want to do that. Facebook, I thought this was interesting that a single click on Facebook is considered speech. So if, let's say a board member A says that they have an opinion on something that's going to be discussed, 2 board members could click like on it and that could be considered a conversation. Snapchat, I don't know if anyone here uses Snapchat. I've never used it, but it basically talks about the fact that things can disappear. So Snapchat, it's only up for a little bit and then disappears, but still there's that risk of, you know, the serial communications. And a screen capturing us. Twitter, same thing, same idea as Facebook. You know, commenting or retweeting could be a meeting depending on how many board members are involved. Instagram, same idea, it's just a picture. So they use the example of like a picture of a project site and a brief note conveying support or opposition. So again, 2 other board members like that post, that could be considered deliberation or communication. So there's just a couple of things there. Basically, just avoid each other in the digital world is what I gather from this. So again, avoid commenting, liking, tweeting, retweeting, or posting regarding topics within the jurisdiction. Just be careful with your engagement.
Could you go back to that one?
Yes.
So I know, okay, so,
Also your opinions, that's the big thing, is it's okay to put out information, but if you, as the board member, are saying, I really support, you know, whatever, they talk about being careful with, you know, putting your opinion out there, because any other board members could read it and then, you know, just liking it or commenting on it or, you know, talking about it, you're then deliberating kind of outside of a public meeting.
So I know that Katie and I in particular try to, frankly, I think as much as possible, correct what I would argue is misinformation, or even if it's not intentional, there's, especially on the world of Nextdoor, there's stuff that's being posted that maybe it isn't even necessarily wrong, it's just, you know, a year old, right? And folks that don't, like, so I'm just wondering, is that crossing the line? Like, I think sometimes we both correct the same thing, but
Question for
there's
legal
other,
counsel.
I just don't, yeah, I mean,
Or
it's,
your
it's not a
policy wants
conversation,
to
like, we're not
improve your social
interacting with
media
each
policy.
other, it's like, it's literally posting information for the most part.
Yeah, and this is where it gets really tough, and it's one of the reasons that we've had some help from BB&K on trying to draft social media policy especially, because it's really confusing, and like sort of what's cool and what's not cool is unclear. And there's an inherent tension, right? There's a tension between wanting to engage with the public and answer questions and be accessible and say, oh, you know, actually here's what happened. If somebody's like, what even happened? You're like, let me answer your question, right? And that's a good, that's a public good. And on the other hand is the concern that discussions can happen or deliberations could happen that are not within the full view of the public, that are not even necessarily within the full view of the board, and that could be, you know, a way of circumventing Brown Act stuff. So, you know, kind of the best recommendation, and I think that this will be reflected in our policy, which we designed to be as user-friendly as possible and not complicated, because the law on this is unclear because there haven't been cases challenging it. So everybody's kind of guessing at this point. The best practice seems to be don't engage directly with other board members. So like, I haven't friended you on Facebook for that reason.
It keeps insisting.
It keeps telling me I shouldn't. I'm like, you don't understand the Brown Act, Facebook. Don't get it. It's a bad idea.
We need to talk to Mark about
That's how I'll call Mark.
the other Mark.
Yeah. So not interacting with other board members directly is sort of a best practice. And then in terms of commenting or putting out information, I think that there's a big difference between talking about something that's already in the public record, right? Saying like, here's what was discussed in a meeting, you can go find the video, it's out there, versus like, I don't know, this is a bad example, but like me getting on Nextdoor and being like, we're undergoing a strategic planning, you know, RFP process, and here's what I think we should do. Like, that would be totally inappropriate, because I'm putting out information that is within our deliberative process that hasn't been deliberated on yet.
But Katie, real quick, if I can,
Yeah.
but the announcement itself
The
is not
announcement
a
itself
problem.
is
It's-
fine.
Yeah, okay.
That's fine, right? Because that's information that's public record, it's publicly available. It's not, you're not interjecting your opinion and saying, you know, we're having a bylaws committee special meeting, or we're having a, you know, special meeting on Monday, and, you know, insert opinion here, right? You're just saying, here's information that is publicly available, ideally from other sources as well, so you're not the sole source. So it's not satisfying, and it's not clear, but sort of, it seems to be the case that if you kind of just weigh it almost in a case-by-case basis and try to avoid getting into a discussion, certainly with other board members, and if possible, getting into a long protracted discussion, or even just saying like, you know what, those are all great questions, let's talk about those in a meeting, and trying to move it to a public forum, so that, because of course there are people who have a material interest in those questions who maybe are not on Facebook or Nextdoor or Instagram or Twitter or whatever it is, right, who would want to participate as well. And so by having those conversations occur exclusively online, it's sort of, it's cutting them out of the discussion as well, which is problematic. So yeah, it's a balancing act.
Great. And once the board has a social media policy, then at least you guys have a guideline for what you guys have decided is the best way to go.
Best practice.
So we're almost to the end, the conclusion here. The other thing that this mentions is communicating during a meeting. So this has been brought up in CSDA trainings that I've gone to as well, is board members texting during a meeting. There have
How are you
been-
gonna vote?
Right. It's a public record, so, I think
my
there was a workshop that I went to where someone said, yeah, the board member was texting and a member of the public requested to see what they were doing, basically. So it can be very tricky, and it's just best not to go down that road. Again, avoid online communication with board members, and there at the bottom, I think we all know that one well. If you don't want to read it in the newspaper, don't do any of that stuff. So, if you guys have questions, I think Katie can, or Cindy can record them and get them off to Ruben.
Thank you, Caroline. Sure. It's been requested to have a 5-minute recess, which we will do right now. It's 7:12, we'll be back at 7:17, please. Yeah. We are all back from recess. It's 7:22, and we are back in session.
Okay.
And we're moving on now to new business. And that's A, California Voters' Rights Acts. It's informational, and I think that's something for you, Katie?
Yeah. So this is a super important thing that I wanted to get on the agenda, and I wanted to put it on as an informational item so that we could just sort of start this conversation, because it is a much larger one. And there's a white paper in your board packet that sort of outlines all of this that hopefully you've had a chance to read. I think it does a pretty good job of laying it out. But basically, the way this all kind of intersects with us is under the California Rights Act, or excuse me, California Voting Rights Act, basically at-large districts are kind of discouraged, because the idea is that when you have elections that happen at large, they tend to inherently disadvantage protected communities. And usually, protected classes exist in the law for a lot of different groups, but usually those tend to be racial and ethnic minorities. And the idea is that you end up with boards and with representation that is not representative of your electorate, and that creates polarized voting and a lot of problems. And what this has led to is a series of lawsuits against special districts, and those lawsuits usually end up with the districts converting to by district or by ward voting, because the requirements of the CVRA are very much designed to weigh in favor of ensuring better access to representation and more fair elections, and so the burden on the district is high to prove that that doesn't happen. And quite honestly, most of the time it can't do that, because usually it does fail to meet the standards set out by the CVRA. So what's been happening is there's sort of a process that has unfolded between special districts, the state legislature, and various law firms that are interested in going around and serving special districts, such that if we were to, for example, be served with one of these suits tomorrow, we would have 90 days from the minute that happened to begin a process of converting to a by-district election. Or we could choose to fight it in court, and a judge would almost invariably say, you must be out of your mind. Like, of course there are problems, you have to convert to this anyway. The 90-day thing, people choose to do it because it caps your legal fees at $30,000. So that means we don't have to pay that much. Anyway, I say all of this not because I think that we should, do something out of fear that we will get sued, but I think that we should have a conversation about the merits of being proactive on this. I do think that there's an argument to be made that our representation is not necessarily well distributed geographically, that it's not necessarily, representing all parts of Altadena equally, and that there, I think personally, like full disclosure of my bias, I think that there could be a tremendous amount of value in looking at shifting to this kind of process. It would also have the added benefit of shielding us from future issues. Excuse me, with a lawsuit like this. So I wanted to put it on the agenda as an information item. Obviously, we can't take any action on it, but I do think that maybe we should talk a little bit about it and think maybe about what kinds of information we would want to have more of so that we could have a good discussion about the pros and cons and what we might want to do. So there you go.
I just wanted to clarify, in reading this, that the idea of the $30,000 cap, of course, must mean a cap on us paying the legal fees of the opposite
That's
side.
exactly right.
That doesn't
cap
include our
fees.
legal fees.
No, it does not.
Right.
Our legal fees could, go through the roof, but
Yeah.
it's plaintiff's fees.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I did notice also that it talked about how one of the very first things you should do if you go down this road is to hire a demographer.
That's
Or
right.
or that maybe your law firm helps you hire a demographer or so on. So I don't know, I guess one of my first questions, at the risk of racking up a little bit of legal fees with asking them a question, is what involvement so far does our own law firm have in these kinds of issues? Or, are they going through this process? I mean, they're a special district
Yeah.
law firm,
They, we didn't ask them to weigh in
No,
on this,
not yet.
But I know that they do have some experience with it. I believe that they've gone through, I'm pretty sure that I'm representing this correctly. I do believe that they've gone through the 90-day process, or have been involved in that in some way, shape, or form. So, I think that they would have something useful to,
Who was that, Katie, I'm sorry?
is
The Ruben.
BB&K. So Betsy's question is like, what experience do they have with this whole process?
Yeah.
Right.
I'd just like to say also, kind of on a philosophical note, the way I became aware of the whole idea of this as a current voting rights issue is in teaching 8th graders the history of voting rights in the United States, and the project that my students were doing was taking a historical civil rights issue and looking at the current ramifications of it, and that is the example of what is the current voting right. I mean, in California, we're not looking at voter ID laws and all the other kind of stuff that are happening in other parts of the country, but Santa Monica City Council, for example, is embroiled in this big time right now, and I mean, we're representative democracy in Altadena. We're like all there is, really,
Exactly.
and I do feel like this is a really serious issue, and not just one to grapple with, to sort of cover our behinds, but to really look at what the right thing is for us, for our town. So I'm really, really happy that this is before us. So I don't know, to me that makes, as far as starting a conversation, that does make to me a sense as a logical first step, is to just find out what our current law firm can tell us about what they're already doing, because we would have to involve them, I presume.
So I think the other thing we should do before we go full board with BB&K though is at least make an attempt to reach out to the Registrar Recorder's office to see if they do anything to provide these kinds of services. I mean, they're responsible for dealing with, all kinds of other redistricting issues and drawing the maps and all that. So I don't know if it's something that they, even if it's for a fee, if that's a service that they provide, but it's something we should check on. But I think this is without a doubt the right way to go. I mean, I've personally been involved in pushing this issue in other areas. But I also feel like we definitely need to agendize this in the pretty near future. I feel like we should make a clear statement on an intent to work towards implementing this prior to the next election. But what I would try and convey to the community is that we just went through what I think was probably the most competitive election that Altadena Library Board has ever seen.
Absolutely.
So, and I mean, seriously competitive. I mean, you know, number of people who chose to run, the, you know, amount of money spent, the number of people talked to, the doors knocked on, I think went way, you know, even the turnout, I think, way beyond what this district's ever seen. So I think we should move in this direction. It's the right thing to do, but I would really urge the community, I think all of us on this board are committed to doing that. I think, you know, getting a resolution passed to get this implemented prior to 2020. But again, urging like folks against the whole lawsuit issue with a clear commitment to move in this direction. Just looking at the priorities we have right now on budgeting stuff that we're trying to figure out how we're gonna pay for, not having a permanent director, I think before we make any real moves on this, I think it would be incredibly useful to have a permanent director in place, have a strategic plan in place, right? But you know, the lawsuit thing would just put us in a situation where now we're having to spend a bunch of money to do something that we're already committed to, and that would take away from, you know, I think like Renee said earlier, all this, every time we spend money on legal stuff, it's taking money out of the budget for actually providing services. So, yeah, I mean, those are just my initial thoughts.
Can I say something really quickly? So, definitely, I think we can reach out to the LA County Register Reporter. They helped us draft the resolution for switching to even year election cycles. And that was also a California Voter Rights Act issue, because when you have your elections in odd years, you don't get the turnout that general elections get. So they may have resources to help with this. The other thing is that if you do get the letter threatening to sue, you actually have 45 days to pass the resolution. And then it extends your window of not being sued. But one thing I thought was interesting about this was that it says generally that the board members should be allowed to finish their terms. So I think if you guys were to be proactive on this, you know, your intention could be that the board, you know, plans to undergo this process of hiring the demographer and doing these hearings and things like that, with the intent that at the next election, because we do have seats that are up in 2020. And I think the public, with what you said about the election and, you know, how much was invested in it and all of that, I think the public would be upset if it was any sooner than that, because they all just went through this and, you know, voted for who they voted for. But I think the intent of moving this direction with the idea that maybe the next seats that are up in the next cycles, you know, you could be there.
Yeah, I mean, I think as an agenda, and we'll talk about this when we get to, I guess, item 9 or 10 or whatever it is, but for a future agenda item, I think it would be good in May to be able to have, you know, more information from Registrar Recorder's Office, potentially from, you know, CSDA, or I wouldn't be shocked if they didn't, or if they couldn't point us in a direction of somebody who has that. And they may have, you know, demographers they work with. I mean, this is a pretty specialized thing, so I'm sure that there are people who do this on the regular. And maybe if we could get a sense of like timeline and process and maybe the potential costs, so we can budget for it.
Mark, if you have a brief question, I'll allow that from the floor.
That's not a question, I didn't realize you were gonna talk that much on this thing. Basically, I would say the Altadena Town Council is already broken up demographically. And I think that the county is, if I remember right, about 20 years ago, it's almost like, you know, every 10 years with the census. I think the county had a process to deal with where the lines are, and that makes logical sense. And I think there's 16 members, but 2 of the districts have doubles, right? I mean, they all have doubles, but there's like a zone something .1 and a zone .2, the ones up where I live. The only reason I say that is I think there's 7 geographic zones broken into Altadena. And if that's the case, you know, I mean, look, especially with the bylaw change, the board can always add 2 board seats if that's what they wanted to do. I don't know if that's good, bad, or indifferent, but I will just tell you that, I'll just remember on my time on the board, 3 of the people came from the west side, whatever you want to call the west side of Altadena. Many people call it Lake. Other people call it Fair Oaks. So it's really a tough issue when you get there, but the town council boundaries have been worked with the, the offices there at the Register Recorder's Office.
Yeah.
So that's
Problem
the
is
best
the
place to start.
district and the library district boundaries do not match.
Oh, right,
Right.
because there's that little
That's
bit of
exactly right.
Pasadena.
Which
But-
I learned knocking on doors. People were like, no, I'm in Pasadena.
Right.
There's this weird group of people that are in Pasadena, vote for our election, but don't get to vote for the Pasadena City Council.
Because they're an unincorporated
That's,
village.
that's exactly
Yeah.
right. And then according to this, it says that they have to be equal or no more than, 5% variation of some sort. So, yeah, so even though those boundaries are 7, there are 7 seats, I believe, for the Altadena Council, you're going to have to look at maybe 5, or unless you're going to do 7.
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong, but under the education code, which is our establishing act, we can't add seats. We are mandated to be a 5-member board. So-
Exactly.
It was like 3 or 5, because we asked this question to the county actually a long time ago. And they were like, you can have 3 or 5.
Yeah,
And it
right.
was, like, it wasn't
It
more.
it wasn't more.
Yeah, you can't just add, you can't
Yeah,
pack the
it's
entire
a-
board.
Well, and as I.
It's a special board. It's a
Yeah.
special
Weird
district.
because
It's a special
we,
district.
we kind of fall under a lot of different sets of jurisdictional rules, but I think, even if we're just, as we're looking at this process, I think coming together on what our intent is, and
It's
then
good.
figuring out the logistics of that as we go along, I think that would be pretty important.
Yeah, I think that we've answered the biggest question with this conversation, because I'm on board too with that kind of a change. So I sense that the board is not
Yeah.
united, or not divided, I should say, and that would be a big part of it. So the rest is trying to figure out the steps that would be
Yeah.
taken in a way that would reduce or eliminate our liability and this sort of thing. My understanding of it is that somebody has to bring send you a letter and have a plaintiff and get the ball rolling to have this whole
Yeah.
thing kick in about the $30,000 in cap fees, even if you make all the deadlines, but you can act proactively
That's right.
as an agency and get this thing underway right away. So that actually would be my vote, and I would say that we as a board, this is just my musing here on this, we need to think about what concrete step we're gonna take at the very next board meeting, because to me, this is not a can that can be kicked down the road, and thank you, Katie, for bringing this to our attention, because it really is a big issue.
Thank you.
So I'm not quite sure what that would be, other
Well-
than to get right into the resolution or something like that and take it from there, because all that does is start the,
And then
the
you're gonna
clock
have
and
to-
so on.
Yeah.
The problem with me, there's 2 issues that kind of rankle me a little bit. One is that it doesn't have to do with us or the law, but the fact that there's already a cottage industry set up out there of lawyers to go after, library districts like us who can barely afford this sort of thing, and getting 7-figure settlements from these poor people, that's a problem. And then, well, go ahead, Gwen.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say.
I'm just agreeing with you.
So that bothers me a lot, actually. But I think if we were to be proactive and get ahead of the curve, then we could avoid that sort of thing.
I think that's exactly right, and I think also that we make ourselves a less interesting target by doing that.
Yeah.
Most of the people who are getting sued right now are in like Imperial County, and they're kind of moving through. So I think that, Betsy, I find myself very much of a similar mind with you and what you said earlier. Like, yeah, we should definitely be proactive on this. I think it's important that we shield ourselves from, a process and a liability that can be problematic. But quite beyond that, this is an important and sort of morally valid thing for us to do and to undertake. And I think it is, I think you're right. I think we need to put it on the May agenda and start moving.
The other point I didn't make was that if you look at the work required at the board level, it's gonna require a big commitment from us too. Multiple meetings coming up, maybe 3, 4 in a month, special meetings and this and that to get through this whole process based on what I'm reading here.
But if we can work on a 12-month calendar that's
Right.
not being forced upon us. I think the 3 to 4 meetings a month is if we
Is
get
if you
stuck
get the
in this
letter.
90-day thing.
Yeah.
Right.
I think if we're proactive and we do the right thing, I think we'll be able to avoid that. I think some of the questions we need answered, I don't know how much of this, Cindy and the staff can track down before May. I think the biggest question I have is timeline. Like, I don't know if that's something the registrar could answer. Like, how early, how many months prior to the November 2020 election would this all need to be done in order to be implemented? And I think that's our
That's
biggest
the question.
timeline. If we're gonna do a resolution saying we will have this done and in place by X date, it can't be November 2020, it's gotta be however long
And it will
before.
have to go to the Board of Supervisors, so you have to allow yourself enough time to, I believe, because that's what happened with the other election change, so you have to give yourself enough time to draft the resolution, you guys approve it, it gets sent to the Board of Supervisors, gets on their agenda for whatever meeting they decide. I mean, they meet weekly, but
That's true.
it goes to them for approval, and then you go from there. So, I'm happy to work with Cindy to get in touch with the county and just get the
And
information
if
ahead of
indeed
time.
you're, even if you're dividing this up into Altadena into 5 sections, that means that you're looking for trustees from each one of those 5 sections, or districts, as they might call them, or whatever they might call them. So, yeah, a timeline would really be helpful to know what are all of the processes that we need to go through to try to make sure, to ensure that the public, number one, the community knows this is what's going to happen, and the voting possibilities.
Can I just say, I mean, we all who ran just now know that we all had to commit by July. So if we're serious about being ready in time for people in, every corner of Altadena to be thinking about running, in November, we need to be through a lot of this process well before next summer. And so, I do feel like I think it's a pretty solid, good first step for May, for the May meeting, to get the feedback from BB&K, to get the feedback, that was a great idea, Kylan, thank you, or I guess it was both of your ideas, from the county. And ultimately, I think we're gonna have to have a committee. I mean, this is not work that we're gonna do, only at board meetings. It's gonna be work that needs to be done in between board meetings. So
Absolutely.
maybe that's something we can at least start to talk about in May as well, is the formation of I guess it would be an ad hoc committee for this purpose of investigation and drawing up a plan.
I think it will be important to determine whether or not, with the timeline, we can accomplish that, and then decide, for the 2 seats that are up, what districts.
It'll be 3.
3 seats are up.
Okay, so 3 seats that are up, what districts?
Yeah,
those are
they
gonna
must
go.
be represented.
Yeah, of course.
And Mark's got a good point, Altadena's sort of already divided up a little bit along census tracts and so on, and that might make it a little easier to get that part of things done, so. I just think putting that topic on as an action item, whatever that might be, waiting for some recommendations from you, and along with any help that those of us on the board can possibly give in the meantime, so it's not all just landing in your lap. I think that's the way it should go.
Right.
All right, good.
Could I make a suggestion?
Yes, please, Brian.
Didn't know you were going to be talking about this tonight. The Pasadena Unified School District went through a process a few years ago of redistricting, or actually districting. And so they actually had a long process of community engagement and had a multitude of meetings, because the PUSD originally was just like they were at large. But because of state mandates and the Voting Rights Act, they went to districts, and this is about 4 years ago or so.
So one recommendation or suggestion I would have is to talk to the Pasadena Unified School District board members who were involved or engaged in that process, and they had a consultant who they used. It was a protracted, and I'm glad you're thinking about this now, because it took quite a while to gather input, because what they were really worried about is where they were going to draw the boundaries to be as fair as possible. So anyway, that's a resource that's local that I would suggest you check into.
Brian, you don't happen to know which board members those are exactly, who were involved? I'm sure it's
Jackie.
an
Well,
librarian,
the ones who are new were kind of the first recipients of it. I think Patricia Halen would know what that process was, and maybe even the board chair right now, Larry Torres.
I'm going to ask
Because
Jackie Jacob.
they were the ones who benefited from, or they were the first ones to run in districts. So while you had to cover the entire Altadena area if you were running for your campaign, now they just have a specific district where they're focused on, just like the Pasadena City Council. I will try to remember or look up who the head of the committee was. He works for the gas company, and he did it as a volunteer, but he would be a great person to talk to too. But I need to look through my notes to find out what his name was.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Okay, that cover that? So the next topic is 7B, and actually we have a request for Brian to speak in advance of that one. That's the selection of the strategic planning consultant. You should have just stayed up there, huh?
You never know with these things what's going to come up. I've been to a lot of city council meetings, and there's always surprises. I just wanted to say that during the community conversations process, I really, really enjoyed it. It was fascinating, and it was great to get to meet everyone around the community. So personally, I'd like to continue that process through the strategic planning activity that's coming up. Another aspect that I wanted to share with you is that while my group doesn't have specific library strategic planning experience, we have a tremendous amount of community engagement, community organizing, community outreach, and then also public health experience. And one thought that came to my mind was the nexus between what libraries are now and public health. And in particular, for example, the Pasadena Public Library has hired a case manager to work with people who are homeless, people who have mental health issues, people who have substance abuse issues. And so our group's background, I think, could be really valuable because of the experience we have. One other thing I wanted to mention is I've worked with these two for 20 years. One was the head of Day One, which is an alcohol, tobacco, substance abuse program that works with kids in Pasadena. And the other one worked for the Pasadena Public Health Department. And I love working with them, and I would really, really appreciate the chance to work with them again. So I'd be happy to answer any of the questions that, because I know there were some in this chart, but I'd really love to be, I'd be grateful to be considered, or our team would be considered as one of the finalists for this particular contract. So thank you very much for allowing me to speak.
Okay, you bet. Thanks, Brian. My comment to what Brian just said there is kind of tails into something else that I've been thinking of, and I'll just say it real quick, and that is that idea of having a public health resource at a library. Sounds a little wacky at first, but in Chicago, the Chicago Public Library System now has a full-time social worker. Of course, it's a bigger library system than us, and they are dealing with homeless folks that come in that find themselves wandering around the library, and they will take those folks, find out what the best social net for them should be, and get them to that agency or to wherever they need to go. And that's something I think also kind of creeps into our strategic plan a little bit, is that idea of how are we going to deal with what is probably gonna be an escalating homeless problem that might creep up into our area in the future. Just wanna make that comment.
Yeah, and I think, you know, that this is a thing that certainly has come up in some of the preliminary conversations with the strategic planning committee, is this idea of, you know, what can the library as a district do in-house, and what partnerships can we create to get people connected to services, right? So we are not the Chicago Public Library System, so we don't have all the resources of a huge organization, but what we do have are a lot of local organizations that are doing really good work. I mean, Union Station just opened up some offices on North Lincoln in Alpena. And so I think that, you know, we could do a lot better job of building partnerships with other organizations and figuring out ways to connect people and to provide services through those partnerships without necessarily thinking about, you know, how to do all of that. Because I don't think it's feasible, and I think that, you know, as we go through this process, it's gonna be really instructive to hear also what's coming from the community, because there may be, you know, needs or interests or services that they're asking for that we haven't, you know, really considered or debated yet. So I think that there's a lot of room for discovery and curiosity, and that's hugely important to this process, is to try to keep as open a mind and as active an imagination as possible, so that we're kind of listening to everybody from an open place. So I really, that's a long way of saying, like, I really agree with you. I think there's some really interesting things on the horizon. So with this action item, you know, the recommendation that we had in the committee report was to request that the board allow myself as chair and Cindy together to continue to follow up on some of the questions that have arisen today, and to do a little bit more investigation into some of, I would say, probably the top 4. I think it's pretty clear that that we've got, you know, some strong options, and then some folks that are just not really, you know, relevant, whether they're too far away or they're too corporate or they're financial services or whatever. But I would say on our front page, it sounds like our top 4 people are worth talking, you know, through another series of questions. And so I guess the recommended action would be to request that the board empower us to go ahead and do that, and then with the result of those questions having been answered, references having been tracked, to go ahead and appoint somebody to start the process. Hopefully that can all happen before the May meeting, so that we can get moving, because we do have a self-imposed but nevertheless real deadline of September 1st for this process. And I think there are so many questions that keep coming up and get punted to, and we should figure that out in the strategic plan, that it will be a focusing process for us as well, to help us really dial down. So that would be my recommendation, if the board would be more comfortable for us to come back in May with some finalists, and we can do this again then. We can certainly, but that would be, I think those are probably the two best options.
Just having gone through this with the search committee, the reference check process is going to be really key.
Yeah.
So I'm glad to hear that's part of the plan. And given, I mean, I guess I'm comfortable if we decide as a group, just to put my opinion on the table, to say, you know, do that investigation for the top 4, and if you have, you know, and if you end up with the time left to go ahead and move forward and move into a contract with someone, I'm willing to give you that vote now. But the reference checking process took a long time, so it may, you know, you may not even be able to get through to a decision, especially that because you're involving a committee too.
Well, we're
I mean, a
involving
big
it,
committee.
and we're meeting a week earlier in May.
Yeah.
Right.
So that, I mean, that would be
there's
extraordinary. That said, you know, being at least theoretically willing to just, you know, let the committee make the decision. I will say I do have a strong feeling that among those top 4, cost is a huge factor for me, and proximity is a huge factor for me. So those would be my main concerns. I mean, other than, you know, obviously the experience and the differences among them in terms of their what they bring to the table is also very important, but those are like top line items for me.
Yeah, I mean, I'm comfortable with that approach as well. I don't know if we've got 4. I mean, we have an approved budget of 30,000. One of these 4 is way above that. And the second one appears as though they would go above it, although there's some questions and some clarification. My feeling is I feel like the Roush group should just be taken out of it. I just don't see any way that they're gonna come within our approved budget. And then, yeah, so I mean, that leaves us with 3, and I mean, but I think I'm fine with leaving it to the committee, or to Katie and Cindy.
I am as well, and I would add cost to my list. I don't think I put that in there before. But however you slice this, if we move ahead with the same model that we did before, and that is that, you know, yes, you've got carte blanche to make that decision. Even if it did go past the next board meeting, you'd still be, you know, your deciding mode, let's say, and if you need some help, or you needed to break a tie, or, you know, it was a dead heat with people, then we could discuss that again. But I would be in favor of turning it over to you. You've done a good job so far, and I think that method worked pretty well with me and Betsy too for the executive search.
Yeah, I mean, I think cost, proximity are undeniably hugely important. And you know, I know I talked about this a lot earlier, but just library expertise as well.
That's
And
really important.
it's really important. And so I think some additional follow-up, because you guys know how this is, like, everybody turns in a proposal, but sometimes through the process of having those conversations, and we wanted to be, because we do have a mix of people who are like able to be in the room and people who are not, we wanted to be really fair and not do any conversing with people ahead of this meeting. So I think, you know, just making sure that we're conducting it in as fair a way as possible is really important to me as well. So yeah, I think there are a lot of follow-up conversations that need to happen with everybody, and that we'll learn more and we'll have a much better sense. But yeah, I hear you, cost and proximity are top of my list as well.
Can I just say one more thing, which is that the fact that Terry and I did these Skype interviews at the very, very end was advice that I got about how important it is that the chemistry be good, and that you know, you really can't get that from paper. You know, maybe in terms of it being an equitable process, you know, you Skype everybody even if they're down the street. But I would just really recommend that as a final step to, especially, you know, if you're down to 2 or 3, that really helped us feel like we, you know, because we had people who really were in many ways kind of equally qualified on paper. And just the idea that it gives you the sense of what it would be like to work with that person was huge.
I think that's totally right. I think it's a really important point.
Okay, so is there a motion then?
I move that we authorize the Strategic Planning Committee to continue the selection process, and that we authorize them to make a final decision.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded.
Point of clarification, just with the 3 or 4, were you gonna throw out, that's not the right word. But point of clarification, because the motion wasn't specific to the top 3 or the 4.
I think they need to.
I'm comfortable with the motion leaving that decision to the committee.
Yeah, I don't think it was specified. It's wide open. So,
That's all, clarification.
all right, so it's been moved and seconded. All in favor, please say aye. Raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye. Aye. That motion carries. Thank you. Now we are on to 7C, process for selection of architectural and space planning service consultant. action item. And,
I don't know if we have,
well, I'm gonna defer to Cindy on this one.
Well, I think it was similar to the one we just voted on, in terms of giving the committee some authority to move forward with the RFP.
And that was what we decided earlier, that we really didn't need to do anything on that particular one, because we were simply expanding the scope of it at the same price, right? Okay, good. So.
we'll have an action, yeah, I don't think we need.
Well, we probably don't need an action because we only have 3 weeks, and probably all we'll achieve in the next 3 weeks is getting the RFP out on the street and, determine the deadlines for that, so there's probably no action between here now and the next meeting.
No, I think the earliest would be the June meeting.
Yeah.
By the time we get them back, I mean, even June might be pushing it to assess.
Yeah.
Okay, so do we cancel that? Is that the right term?
We can move to postpone it, or we could, I think that's probably the best thing, is to move to postpone that, item, so the 7C, move to postpone that to, do you wanna say May or do you wanna say June?
I would say June.
Okay, then we move to postpone item 7C to our June regular meeting agenda.
It's a June meeting? I'll second that then.
Okay. We moved and seconded, all in favor, say aye. Raise your hand. Aye.
Aye.
All right, thank you. Item 8, correspondence. Is there a report that goes along with that, or any comments?
So I stuck that in there from CSDA. There are a couple of issues that do pertain to our library district, or could. And so the information is in there. CSD does provide some opinion on some of the Senate bills. And then they even have templates if the board wanted to support a letter, or, write a letter of opposition or support for a Senate bill. But basically, the take action brief is in the board packet, and then if you guys wanted to, add anything on to a future agenda to discuss, to get more information on, or to consider writing a letter from the district, you could do that. But basically, it's just informational.
I have a quick
I
question
spotted-
if I may. Sorry.
Go ahead. I spotted one item on there that I do think we need to act on, and that would be, but knowing a little bit more about it first. ACA 1, which I've read about before, is a movement that would, or a proposal that would lower the amount of voters needed to pass taxes, special taxes like this, I'm assuming with the sort that we'd like to renew again in 2024, and also for any bonds that are issued on our behalf. So both of those thresholds, if they were lower, that would be, I think, to our advantage, because we do need to start thinking, if we want to accomplish the repairs and rehab that we need to do to both branch buildings, how we're going to pay for that. And bonds could enter into that, or it could be some other method. We have yet to discuss all that. But to have a letter of support for this would be a good way to go. And they make it easy. I've already printed the thing out. So I'm thinking that on the next agenda, if we were to have that as an item, maybe an action item, we do it or we don't do it, that would give me personally enough time to look into this and see how well it applies to what we're thinking of here.
So you're asking to place an action item on the agenda regarding this board formally?
Yeah, it would be writing this
Taking a
letter.
position.
We vote to write this letter and send it in. Now we can just do it, individually, I suppose, but I'd like to have the weight of the whole board behind it.
We could put, just the template from CSDA, the letter that they've provided, we could put in the board package, and you guys could vote on whether to sign off on that,
Yeah,
basically. and
I've
send
already
it.
got it printed out, so I can give that to you. But it's just something that we need to keep an eye on, and we can write a letter to them that supports it, and that'll be a nice first step for us.
I have a quick question on the one on the next page, on page 3. Does it cost us to store the video of our record of our meetings?
That is a good question for Christopher. Oh yeah, this is the other one that they mentioned is that we have to store, you know, footage of video where nothing's happening, and they wanna move it to where you're only storing relevant, video data. But yeah, that would be a good question for Christopher. I don't know, I'm assuming, you know, our video is just stored according to the public records.
Christopher was actually upstairs working, so Jonathan's gonna go grab him.
It's not a critical question right now, I'm just curious. Because, I mean, obviously, they're on YouTube, but do we have to keep our own copies on our own servers in order to really comply with?
So this one is, I believe, like security footage. So like the security footage we have around the building, we have to store. And what they want to do, or I guess it says the legislation's not moving forward this year, but what they wanted to do is limit it so that districts are not storing, you know, endless amounts of video footage where there's nothing going on.
I may be corrected, but I do think we pay a fee, and one of the things that we're looking into are our retention policies, because right now we keep everything forever, and that just doesn't make sense, so that is.
So this would, if this passed, it would make it legal for us to just store 2 years' worth and ditch the rest?
Right.
Okay.
I think this HR one, I mean, we're small, so we wouldn't have too many folks with this pension reform issue, because our staff are we in CalPERS?
Yes.
It seems like it'd be just good, I don't know if we do it through the HR system or what, but just to make sure that we're complying with this. I think also if we did pay any of these disallowed benefits, I would want to make sure that we're getting ahead of making sure that anybody that's getting close to retirement is aware, so that they're not, you know, enjoying their time on the beach and then get a bill from CalPERS.
Check.
So are you proposing an action item for the next meeting, Jason?
I think it's more of just an information thing. I feel like it'd be good to, I don't know if it's just as simple as a request to our HR system, but when this was passed, if we do any kind of action on it, or, you know, I mean, I don't know if we have any folks that are that, you know, how close anybody is to retirement, but if we can just get ahead of somebody getting surprised by something as significant as this, that would be the right thing to do.
Okay, we'll get more information on that one.
All right, any other comments? So that gets us to number 9, proposed future agenda items. Probably worth going over those real quick because there've been a few tonight. Yeah, so I have an action item on the California Voter Right Act, and we're going to wait to get a little bit more information from you at the next meeting before we make a move on that based on you know, what the exact action should be in terms of we write a letter or get the process rolling, whatever you find out. And again, you know, if you need any help on this, Kylan and Cindy, let me know. I'm happy to jump in on this. And just now I talked about a vote on a letter of support of ACA 1 that would come from the board. And that's one that we've already got printed out. Now I'm going to do a little homework on that to make sure that this is worth our time and it is what I think it is in my mind. So I will be back to talk about that a little bit on the next one. Other action items that we discussed, everybody?
I've got another one I want to
Okay.
add. Just echoing what Jason said when he announced about the California Library Association, I would like an item on the next agenda similar to the one that resulted in Katie going to the CSDA conference about whether any of us, would like membership in CLA and would like to attend that conference.
I
to
thought we all
represent.
had membership in, don't we have membership in?
We have it in the district association. I don't think we have, in the special district association, but
Oh,
I don't
okay,
believe we have CLA membership.
Our old bylaws though did say, I believe that that membership would be covered by the
Right.
district. I don't, there were a few organizations, I think, that had specified, it may have
I thought
been
it was.
ALA or CLA, but, technically, I believe if that's something that you want, the district should be providing that or reimbursing your.
Check it out and see.
So I don't know whether the new bylaws, I'm sorry, the new policies and procedures
I
will.
have no idea offhand,
I
but
don't
we
know
will
really.
find out on Monday.
Okay. And just in case if we could have that on the agenda, I'd
Well,
appreciate
and
it.
even so, we would need to put it on the agenda because we have to vote to adopt the new policies in May
Right.
regardless, so they wouldn't be, you know what I mean?
Right,
Cal Libraries, is that what it's called?
California Library Association.
And the only other thing I had was that, do we feel like we've got a series of meetings coming up here, like one after the other? Do we feel like we've got them all calendarized and notices registered appropriately and so on? The budget meeting will be a standing committee, so we need to come out 72 hours early with the agenda and so
So
on.
whenever you guys have the agenda for that, I mean, we can get it up.
Okay.
We have to
Do you have a date
pass.
on the budget one? You're still
No,
working
it
on it?
hasn't been finally decided. We're
It
thinking it's
will
gonna
be
be.
decided tomorrow.
Okay, yeah, probably April the 30th.
I just have to confirm
Yeah.
again with
Oh, that's really good. And we have the agenda up for the special meeting,
For the bylaws.
the one on Monday.
On Monday, yeah.
That's on
And the
Monday.
agenda for the strategic planning committee meeting is in the packet, so.
It's Sunday.
The strategic planning is Sunday,
This
but the
comes
bylaws
out
is
this
Monday.
Okay.
And
Okay,
the
yeah,
budget
that
is
may-
Tuesday.
There's no other issues to get a meeting to, or I'm sorry, a motion to adjourn?
I'll move that we adjourn.
Second.
We all say
All right, all in favor, say aye.
aye.
All right, the meeting's adjourned at 8:11. Thank you.